It was one of those nights where the darkness feels thicker than usual. I rolled through the outskirts of town, the headlights barely cutting through the shadows of the dense woods lining the road. The radio was off, too quiet, and the engine's hum was the only sound I had. Normally, a late-night shift like this was almost comforting. Nothing ever happened out here. It was supposed to be routine. Calm. Predictable. I checked my watch. 2:15. That small, glowing rectangle on my wrist felt almost unreal in the vast black around me. The kind of time that makes you notice every detail. The way the trees pressed together like they were hiding something, the occasional rustle of leaves that sounded too deliberate to be the wind. I shook my head, tried to tell myself I was imagining it. It had been a long week, a long month, and I had been staring at this road so many nights. I could almost drive it blindfolded. Still, tonight, something about the silence felt off. I passed the old gas station near the bend. It had been closed for years. The glass in the front was cracked, spiderwebbing across the entire window, and the flickering open sign was frozen in a blur of red and green light. Usually I barely notice it. Tonight, my eyes caught it like a magnet. For a second, I swore I saw movement inside. A shadow, someone or something, shifting just behind the glass. I blinked. Nothing. Just the cracked floor tiles and a lone shopping cart leaning against the wall. I forced a laugh, telling myself it was just a stray cat. I kept driving. My headlights danced across the edges of the trees. They were dense, old pines mostly, the kind that smelled like earth and rot after rain. But there hadn't been any rain tonight. The smell was still there, almost wet, damp though the air was dry. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, even though the temperature was mild. You never really get used to that feeling, the one that creeps along your spine when you sense a presence that isn't supposed to be there. I slowed down near a curve where the woods pressed close to the road. Something made me glance to my right. At first, I thought it was a deer, a flash of movement between the trees. But it wasn't a deer. It didn't move like one. It paused, just stood there, watching. The way it stayed still made my stomach knot. My first instinct was to call in, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew I wasn't losing my mind. I swallowed hard and adjusted the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, I thought I saw eyes. Two tiny, dark, reflective dots between the trees, like the forest itself had eyes now. I blinked, and they were gone. Just gone. My hands tightened on the wheel. The road stretched empty ahead, silent except for my own breathing and the faint sound of tires against asphalt. The woods had always felt alive at night. Most people didn't notice it, but anyone who's driven the stretch long enough could feel it. The subtle shift in the air, the way shadows pull differently between trees, how silence isn't really silent. It presses in, makes your ears ring, makes your own heartbeat feel loud enough to wake you. Tonight, it wasn't just alive. It felt aware. I rounded the next bend, where the trees opened slightly, revealing the small creek that cut across the edge of the road. The water shimmered under the moonlight, slow and steady, but there was something about the way it reflected that made my stomach twist. The moonlight looked wrong. Not its usual pale white, but darker, almost tinged with green. I shook my head again. Maybe I was tired, or maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. I turned onto a narrower side road, one I patrolled rarely. It was mostly for private properties and old logging trails, but it was quieter, and tonight I needed quiet. I needed routine. My boots pressed lightly against the pedals as I followed the bends, careful not to stray off the asphalt. The woods closed in tighter here, the trees almost leaning over the road, their branches like crooked fingers. I felt a chill creep along my neck. That's when I heard it, a soft, deliberate crunch of something moving just off the road. I froze. It wasn't a branch snapping under a deer's hooves. Too deliberate, too heavy. My pulse quickened. I told myself to stay calm, that it was probably a raccoon or some other animal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was watching, waiting. I slowed, peering into the blackness beyond my headlights. Nothing, just trees, just shadows. My own breath fogged inside of the windshield. I told myself I was seeing things, that I was overthinking. But the feeling didn't go away. It clung, heavy, cold, and unmistakable. I pressed the button to switch on the dashboard lights. The green glow barely reached beyond the cabin, but it was enough to give me a little comfort. I tried humming a tune under my breath, anything to break the silence. But even that felt wrong, the notes echoing too loud, swallowed quickly by the black around me. Another rustle, closer this time. I felt in my chest, that tightening sense that comes just before real fear. I glanced to the side, slow, careful. Nothing. The road was empty. The trees were still. And yet, I knew I wasn't alone. I tried to focus on the patrol. I reminded myself why I was out here. I repeated the routine steps in my head. Check the edges of the woods. Watch for any signs of trespassing. Keep the radio near in case of calls. Routine. That was the anchor. But even as I muttered to myself, my fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, catching every subtle movement, every flicker in the corner of my vision. The further I went, the heavier the silence felt. It wasn't just quiet. It was oppressive, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Every sound, the wind through the branches, a distant crow, my own heartbeat, echoed unnaturally loud. I realized with a kind of cold clarity that this was what people meant when they talked about the woods at night. It wasn't just isolation. It was attention. Something was here. Something was noticing me. I told myself I was imagining it, that if I kept moving, I'd be out soon, back into more populated areas where the trees thinned and the lights came back. But the road seemed longer than it should have been. The bends didn't feel familiar. I could swear I passed the same old, broken fence twice, even though I knew there was only one of them. My chest tightened. The headlights illuminated the underbrush, but was shallow, not revealing anything deep beyond. And then I heard it, soft, a whisper carried by the wind. Not words, not a voice, just a sound that made my skin crawl, a hiss that threaded itself between the trees, teasing me, close but impossible to locate. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. I couldn't think clearly. Every rational part of me screamed that it was nothing. Yet the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I gripped the wheel tighter, willing myself to focus. Routine. Check. Patrol. Observation. Keep moving. That was my mantra. And yet, every mile I drove, the feeling grew heavier, thicker. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should. The dark patches between the trees deepened unnaturally. I could almost feel shapes just beyond my vision, waiting for me to look directly at them. My thoughts wandered, unwanted but inevitable. I remembered other nights like this. Late shifts where the air seemed to hum with anticipation. Nights when the town felt too still, as if the streets themselves were holding secrets. I remembered walking to the station after a long shift, feeling that same weight settle on my chest, wondering if anyone else noticed or if it was just me. I had always dismissed it before, rationalized it, but tonight, rationality felt useless. Another flash of movement at the edge of my headlights. I slammed the brakes, the tires hissing against the asphalt. My heart jumped, and I stared into the darkness, barely breathing. The woods were empty, or maybe they weren't. I couldn't tell anymore. My eyes were straining, my senses screaming. The quiet felt alive, like the trees themselves were leaning in, curious, patient, waiting. I shook my head, tried to laugh, a short, harsh sound that echoed and died almost immediately. I couldn't stay here forever. I had to keep moving, keep the patrol going, keep the routine. I reminded myself of that, repeating it like a prayer. I finally reached the stretch where the woods started to thin. The oppressive weight of the darkness began to lift, though not entirely. My pulse was still racing. My hands were trembling slightly on the wheel. The whispering sound, whatever it had been, was gone, or maybe I convinced myself it was. I exhaled slowly, long and deliberate. It was just the woods. Nothing more. That's all it had ever been. Routine, patrol, observation. Nothing more. I told myself that over and over as the town lights appeared in the distance, dim and yellow, like a promise of safety. But even as I drove back toward the edges of town, toward the familiar, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. watching, waiting, and that night, the weight of it didn't leave me. It followed me, quiet, patient, like the darkness itself had made a note of me. And it wasn't done yet. The woods didn't change overnight. At least, not in any way that I could see. But something about them felt off. The trees loomed closer than usual, like they had grown in the dark, stretching toward each other to form a tunnel of shadows. I could hear the wind whispering through the branches, carrying sound that weren't quite there, or maybe they were there, but I couldn't identify them. Soft cracks, low murmurs, the faintest scraping noises just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I stepped off the road, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Every step felt loud. Every breath echoed too long. The forest had always been alive at night. Most people didn't notice it, didn't understand that the shadows here moved differently, that the silence carried weight. Tonight, it was almost unbearable. The air felt thick, sticky, like the darkness itself had texture. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, a branch snapping under some animal's foot. My mind knows the rational explanations, but my body doesn't care about logic. My heart was already speeding before I even noticed the first sound, a faint crunch. Behind me, just at the edge of my vision, I spun, flashlight cutting through the black, but there was nothing, just the trees, swaying softly, indifferent. I started walking, slower now, careful not to make too much noise, careful not to let my own fear give me away. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in my hand. I hated that. Light is supposed to comfort you in the dark, but sometimes it only highlights what's hiding just beyond. I squinted into the shadows. Something moved, or maybe I imagined it. A flicker, a motion, too quick to be a person, too deliberate to be an animal. I shook my head. Focus, observation, patrol. I told myself that like a prayer, a mantra, but even as I repeated it, I could feel my pulse against my throat, could feel the tiny hairs on the back of my neck standing straight. The forest had changed tone. There was a rhythm now, a whispering undercurrent, almost like the trees themselves were murmuring. I stopped at a small clearing, where the moonlight broke through in thin silver lines. It should have felt like relief, but it didn't. The shadows here were different. They pooled unnaturally. The shapes of the trees seemed distorted. For a brief moment, I thought I saw figures crouched among the trunks. Human shapes, maybe, but too thin, too long. They shifted when I looked directly at them, melting into background. My stomach twisted. I remembered a story from the old-timers, a tale about the forest eyes, about how some people swear the woods remember you, how the shadows watch. I'd always laughed it off, but tonight, the memory pressed against my mind like the cold of the earth beneath my boots. I felt watched, not just observed, watched, patiently, waiting. A soft hiss, like air escaping through a narrow crack, came from my left. I froze, holding my breath. The sound repeated, a slow, deliberate exhale. I stepped closer, flashlight cutting between the trees, trying to locate it, but the noise always moved, as if avoiding the light, teasing me, keeping just out of reach. My pulse was deafening in my ears. My hand shook. I told myself it was just a rabbit, or a bird, or a fallen branch. Rational, rational, rational. I moved forward. The clearing ended abruptly, and the trees pressed close again. The darkness thickened, and the sounds multiplied. Footsteps, scrapes, whispers. I couldn't tell. They were layered, overlapping, impossible to track. Every time I thought I had pinpointed a source, it shifted. I felt like I was walking through water, though there was none, like the forest had turned liquid, impossible to navigate. I stumbled, catching myself on a gnarled root. My flashlight flickered. My breath came fast, shallow. I told myself to calm down. Slow. Step. Look. Listen. That was all I could do. Keep moving. Observation. Patrol. Keep moving. The sounds grew closer, or maybe I was moving closer to them. A low, rolling murmur now, like voices in a language I couldn't recognize. Not words exactly, but syllables, pauses, patterns, a rhythm that seemed deliberate. I want to call it out, demand it to stop, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. My mouth dry, my body stiff. I caught movement again, something slipping between the trees. Too quick for a person, too deliberate for an animal. It disappeared, leaving a faint indentation in the fallen leaves. The earth itself seemed pressed down, disturbed, like a hand had just withdrawn. I crouched, inspecting it, but there were no footprints, just the impression. My mind tried to rationalize. It could be soil, settling, wind, but my gut screamed otherwise. I stood, flashlight shaking. Every sense was on edge now. I could hear the whispering all around me. It came from every direction and nowhere. The forest felt alive in a way that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The air felt thick with expectation. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. I was rooted to the ground, aware of every shadow, every flicker of movement, every rustle in the underbrush. The moonlight shifted through the branches, catching something reflective. My breath caught. A pair of eyes, maybe, glinting in the silver light. I spun, but the eyes vanished before I could get a proper look. I called out softly, my own voice sounding alien in emptiness. Nothing answered. The echo of my words faded too quickly, swallowed by the darkness. I moved again, careful, deliberate. Step, step, the sounds shifted with me, keeping pace, retreating, circling. It was a game. I hated games. I hated how aware I had become of every minor sound, every slight change in the air. My mind churned, tried to remember every technique for staying calm, every lesson from the academy, every story I had ever dismissed as superstition. None of it mattered. Another flash of movement, closer this time. I could swear I saw a shape crouched against a tree, thin, long limbs, moving in a way that shouldn't be possible. I froze. It didn't flee. It didn't respond. It just watched. I could feel its gaze pressing into me, heavy and patient. My stomach lurched. My hands clenched into fists. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe properly. The forest was no longer just around me. It was inside me. I remembered nights like this from years ago, patrolling alone, walking near the edges of town, feeling the weight of darkness pressing in, but never like this. Never with this intensity. It was as if the forest had remembered me, remembered every step I had taken, and now it wanted acknowledgement. Now it wanted attention. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it, but every instinct screamed that I wasn't. A rustle behind me made me spin. Nothing. Another hiss. Closer, almost inside my ear. I could feel the cold brush of air, subtle but real. My hair stood on end. The shadows between the trees moved in ways that defied reason, bending, shifting, elongating. I wanted to run, but my feet felt heavy, like the earth itself had grown sticky, trying to hold me in place. I kept moving, step by step. My flashlight caught brief glimpses, twisted shapes, shadows that didn't match the trees, movements in the corner of my eye that vanished when I turned my head. My breath came fast, shallow. My heart pounded. I tried humming under my breath, tried repeating my mantra, observation, patrol, routine, but it felt meaningless now. The forest had a rhythm I couldn't match, a pulse I couldn't understand. Then silence, sudden, complete, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, makes your stomach sink. I froze. The air was still. No rustle, no hiss, no whispering. For a moment, I allowed myself to think it had gone, that maybe I had imagined it all. Relief threatened to take hold, but something deeper warned me not to trust it. The silence stretched, oppressive, heavy, and then a single, slow, deliberate step echoed behind me. Not a branch, not leaves, footsteps, clothes, waiting. I didn't turn. I didn't move. I just listened. The sound stopped as abruptly as it started. I waited. Nothing. My chest ached from holding my breath. I wanted to call out. I wanted to demand answers. But I knew that calling would change nothing. The forest shifted. Shadows moved. Shapes that had been hidden became just slightly visible. Too quick to identify. Too wrong to be natural. And I realized with a clarity that chilled me to the bone that I wasn't walking through the forest anymore. The forest was walking with me, observing, testing, waiting. Step by step, I moved forward, flashlight trembling, Senses stretched to their breaking point. The woods seemed endless, the air thick with unspoken knowledge. Every sound, every whisper, every shadow pressed against me. A silent warning. I told myself it was routine, it was patrol, it was observation. I repeated it like a lifeline. But the truth was undeniable. The forest had noticed me, and it wasn't going to let me leave unchanged. The road finally ended where the forest swallowed everything. I stepped off the asphalt into dirt and leaves that had grown thick over years of neglect. The headlights had barely penetrated the canopy, leaving shadows that seemed to stretch and breathe on their own. That's when I saw it. An old campsite, abandoned but not completely forgotten. A fire pit blackened with ashes, rocks arranged in a rough circle, rusted cans, a torn tarp, a folding chair overturned, its legs broken. The smell of damp earth was heavy, but underneath it, faint and almost imperceptible, there was another odor, something coppery, metallic like blood, but old. I moved closer, flashlight sweeping across the scene. Nothing seemed recent, or so I thought. Then I noticed the footprints, not animal prints. Human, fresh enough to sink slightly into the soft earth, the kind that looked like someone had been here recently, maybe hours ago. My stomach turned. I should have called it in. I should have left. But curiosity, call it instinct, call it foolishness, kept me rooted there. I crouched, inspecting the marks. The boots that left them were small, like a child's, that sent a shiver down my spine, heavier than anything I'd felt all night. I forced myself to look up, scanning the trees, the underbrush, the shadows between them. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The only sound was the wind brushing the branches together, like whispers, faint but persistent. Then I saw the symbols, scratched into a nearby tree, deep and deliberate. Lines, triangles, shapes that didn't make sense. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of graffiti, some kids playing games. But the precision, the intent, the fact that it was so carefully carved into living bark, it unsettled me. Each mark seemed purposeful, almost ritualistic. I swallowed hard, fighting the sudden tightness in my chest. I stood and took a cautious step toward the fire pit. A pile of sticks lay beside it, arranged in a way that suggested someone had been trying to build it recently. Small pieces of paper were scattered around, damp and curling with age. One had a word written on it, in hurried, shaky handwriting. I couldn't make out at first, but then I realized it said, "Watch!" My throat tightened. My hands trembled slightly. I looked around. The forest had gone still, as if listening, waiting. I kept moving, slowly, inspecting the campsite further. A pot, rusted and blackened, sat on a flat rock. Inside, remnants of something unidentifiable, ash mixed with dirt. A faint smell lingered, burnt, acrid, like something that had been cooked but never finished. My stomach churned. I wanted to leave, wanted to get back to the road, back to light, back to normalcy. But the footprints kept calling me, or maybe it was my own mind, insisting I follow them, understand them, make sense of them. I circled the campsite, flashlight cutting jagged lines through the darkness. Every shadow seemed exaggerated, every tree trunk elongated, every branch reaching like fingers. I thought I saw movement, subtle, just at the edge of my vision. I spun my head. Nothing, just shadows, but the impression remained. Something had been here. Something was still here. A small backpack, torn and wet, lay half buried beneath leaves. I knelt to inspect it. Inside were scraps of paper, folded and crumpled, each one with strange, indecipherable symbols. Some were simple lines, others intricate, twisting shapes that made my stomach knot. One of them had a small smear of dark red, faded but unmistakable. I didn't want to know what it was, but the evidence pressed itself into my mind anyway. My hands shook as I set the papers aside, forcing myself not to look too closely. I heard it then, a rustle from deeper in the woods, too precise to be wind, too deliberate to be random. I froze, my ears strained, my breath came shallow. The footprints didn't just end at the campsite. They continued, disappearing into the thick underbrush. Someone or something had walked here, moved through these trees recently, and left traces I could still follow. I felt the urge to run, a strong, visceral pull to leave, to get back to the road, to the safety of civilization. But I couldn't. Part of me had to know. I had to see where the prints led, had to understand who or what had been here, step by step. I followed them, careful not to make my own tracks, careful not to alert whatever might still be nearby. The forest seemed alive in a way that was suffocating. Branches brushed my shoulders even when I tried to avoid them. Shadows pooled in impossible places. The faint whispering from the wind became more persistent, almost conversational, as if the trees themselves were murmuring secrets I couldn't understand. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to leave. Every rational thought urged retreat. But still I pressed on. Then I saw more evidence. Tiny trinkets scattered along the path. Broken toys, small scraps of fabric, a single shoe, its laces untied. It was deliberate, symbolic, each piece placed, not lost. My mind raced. A camp abandoned years ago. Yet someone had been here recently, or multiple someones. The forest had absorbed their presence, kept it, whispered it back through the leaves. I found another set of symbols carved into a tree, deeper into the woods. This time, I could make out shapes that resembled letters, or maybe numbers. My stomach dropped. They weren't random. They formed words, cryptic, half erased, almost incomprehensible. One of them read, "Stay." Another, smaller, almost hidden, "Alone." My hands went cold. The forest had a voice now. Not wind, not animals. Something else. Something that communicated through absence, through symbols, through silence and implication. I swallowed hard, forcing my thoughts into order, observation, patrol, keep moving. Step by step, the footprints continued, veering off to the left, deeper into the dense undergrowth. My flashlight flickered briefly, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure crouched between two trees, thin, impossibly still, watching. My pulse spiked. I blinked, and it was gone. Nothing remained but shadow and the sound of leaves whispering under the wind. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a squatter, a homeless person, someone camping illegally. That explanation felt hollow. The meticulous arrangement of objects, the carvings, the paper, the blood, the symbols, it didn't add up. This wasn't just human presence. This was something deliberate, ritualistic, purposeful, and that thought made my stomach turn in ways I hadn't felt before. Another rustle, this time closer. Behind me, I froze, my breath caught in my chest. Slowly, I turned my head. Nothing. The forest didn't just feel alive, it felt aware. Every step I had taken, every breath I drew, had been noted. I could feel eyes or the wave of attention, pressing down from every angle. The campsite had been a lure or a warning. I didn't know which. I circled back to the fire pit. Something had changed. The ashes were disturbed, arranged differently than I remembered. Small embers, cold but intact, clung to the edges. The arrangement of stones had shifted slightly. I hadn't seen it happen. I hadn't been that close. Yet the forest had done it, or someone had, and I hadn't noticed. Panic bubbled under my skin, but I forced myself to remain calm. I couldn't let fear control me. Not yet. I noticed faint footprints leading further away from the campsite. Smaller this time, childlike again. They vanished into the thicker forest, leaving nothing but depression in the leaf litter. I followed them, hesitant, careful, every nerve screaming that I shouldn't. Every rational part of me screamed retreat. But something compelled me forward. I had to know. I had to see. The deeper I went, the darker it became. Even with a flashlight, the shadows were dense, impenetrable. The forest seemed to fold in on itself, as if space were bending. The whispers grew louder, though they still made no sense. A faint, deliberate sound. A snap, a shuffle, a soft exhale, followed me. Every time I turned, nothing was there. Yet I could feel it, watching, measuring, waiting. I reached a small clearing, barely wide enough to turn around. The remnants of another fire, smaller, were here. A single chair, folded and leaning against a tree. A note, pinned with jagged rock, read, "You see." My hands went cold. My pulse raced. My mouth went dry. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to understand, and yet I did. I had to. I realized that the campsite, the footprints, the symbols, the whispers, they weren't random. They weren't left to scare me or to be found by accident. They were meant to be discovered. Me, the attention, the planning, the deliberate ambiguity. It was all meant to draw me in. I swallowed, forcing myself to focus. Observation, patrol, routine, step by step, one foot in front of the other. The forest was quiet now, or maybe it was pretending. The kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat feel too loud, that makes your own shadow look alive. I realized with a cold clarity that I wasn't just walking through the woods. I was part of them. Every step, every movement, every glance was recorded, not by animals, not by wind, something else, something patient, something that waited. I forced myself to turn back toward the road. The footprints faded. The symbols remained, but the forest seemed sated, watching me retreat, not leaving, not letting go. I could feel it following, step by step, waiting for the next opportunity. The abandoned campsite had been a lure, a test, and I had passed, or maybe failed. I didn't know. I just knew that I would never forget it, and that the forest would never forget me. The night pressed down harder than ever. The trees, tall and dense, leaned closer, casting shadows that seemed to move even when the wind was still. I thought I had left the campsite behind, had returned to the edges of normal, the familiar dirt road, the outline of civilization. But the forest had a way of pulling you in, of folding space, so that every turn led only deeper. I heard it first as a faint hiss, carried on the wind through the pines. At first, I dismissed it. I told myself it was a wind, the echo of leaves brushing against each other. But then I heard a syllable. My name, Sheriff. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, like a memory trying to push its way through the darkness. My heart jumped. I froze. My flashlight wavered in my hands. I scanned the trees, but there was nothing, just shadows, long, dark, stretching in every direction. Sheriff, closer this time, more deliberate, a whisper threading itself through the silence. I wanted to call out, to answer, to make contact with reality, but my throat felt tight, locked. My pulse roared in my ears. I told myself it was my mind, imagination playing tricks, that after the campsite, after the footprints, after the symbols, I was seeing and hearing things that weren't there, rational explanations, always rational explanations. But even as I told myself that, my gut screamed otherwise. The voice carried certainty. It wasn't random. It wasn't wind. It had intent. And it knew me. I stepped forward, hesitant, careful. Each footfall seemed louder than it should have been. Each crack of a branch, every snap underfoot, echoed unnaturally through the trees. My flashlight cut a thin beam through the black, illuminating the trunks, the underbrush, the twisted roots. And yet, every time I looked directly at something that moved, it vanished, dissolving into shadow. I kept moving, trying to follow the sound. Step by step, whisper by whisper, it called to me, sometimes faint, sometimes almost at the edge of comprehension, and always my name, my own name, in a tone that felt intimate, familiar, but wrong. I remembered nights like this from years ago, patrolling alone, driving back roads with nothing but silence for company. But nothing had ever been like this. The forest wasn't just silent then. It hadn't spoken. It hadn't waited. It hadn't pressed its presence against my mind so insistently that I questioned every step, every breath. Sheriff. This time the whisper was unmistakable, closer than it should have been. I spun around. My flashlight swung across the trunks, the shadows, the ground. Nothing. Only leaves quivering in the faintest breeze. The dark undergrowth shifting in impossible angles. I told myself to stay calm. Step, breathe, observe, routine, patrol, keep moving. Step, step, step. But the forest was patient. It didn't rush. It didn't reveal itself fully. It teased, moved just out of perception, reshaped reality in subtle ways. Every tree I passed seemed slightly different than the one before. Branches that had been to my left before now loomed right. Shadows pooled where there should have been light. The wind carried sound that weren't there before, scraps of paper fluttering, something brushing across leaves, footsteps that weren't mine. I stopped at a bend where the trees opened slightly, revealing a patch of moonlight. Relief, maybe, but then I saw it. Traces in the dirt, footprints, small and deliberate, leading away from the road into the thicker woods. Fresh, recent, human, or something human-shaped. My stomach nodded. Every rational thought told me to retreat. Every instinct screamed danger. Yet I felt compelled, drawn to them, almost as if the forest itself demanded I follow. The whispers returned, drifting on the wind. My name again and something else. Something I couldn't catch. A word or a phrase, half-formed, almost beyond comprehension. My mind strained, trying to make sense of it. Was it real, or was it my own fear shaping itself into sound? The line between reality and imagination blurred, and I couldn't tell anymore which way was safe. I moved forward, step by step, footprint by footprint. The forest pressed close, every branch brushing my arms, every root threatening to trip me. The air was thick, heavy, almost solid. My breath came fast. I could feel my heart pounding, the way it rattled my chest, echoing in my skull. The forest seemed to sync with me, aware of my fear, magnifying it, amplifying it, teasing it. A flash of movement at the edge of my vision made me spin. Nothing, just shadows, but the sense of being watched intensified. Every nerve in my body screamed. I told myself again, observation, patrol, routine, keep moving, one foot in front of the other. And yet the whispers followed, threading to the pines, intimate, taunting. I stumbled over a root, catching myself against a tree trunk. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure crouched in the shadows, thin, too long-limbed to be normal, watching, waiting. My pulse jumped. I blinked and it was gone. Only the darkness remained. I thought of the campsite, the footprints, the symbols carved into trees. Someone, or something, had been here, still was in some sense. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper was proof. And now the forest itself had found a voice. It was speaking to me, but in ways that warped my perception, that made me question what was real. I forced myself to move forward. Step, step, step. The whispers grew louder, closer. Not just my name now, but fragments of sentences, incomplete thoughts, memories that weren't mine but felt personal, pressing against my mind. Sheriff, come back. I froze. The voice was unmistakable, soft, intimate, almost pleading. My head swiveled, flashlight sweeping, but nothing was there, just shadows, trees, the whispering wind. My knees trembled, my stomach lurched. The forest had begun to invade my mind. The rational part of me shouted to leave, to retreat, to call it in. The irrational part, the part that feared and yet craved understanding, propelled me forward. Step by step, breath by breath. I couldn't stop. The forest had a rhythm now, and I was caught in it. Shadows twisted unnaturally. Branches bent toward me. Roots shifted subtly underfoot. My senses screamed that I was being guided, herded, drawn deeper into the dark. Another whisper, close to my ear, made me jump. It wasn't my name this time, but a phrase, half-formed, indecipherable. I could feel it, hear it, sense it pressing into my thoughts. The line between my own fear and the forest's presence blurred entirely. My pulse thudded in my ears. My vision tunneled. Reality itself felt thin, fragile, like it could snap if I moved the wrong way. I caught a glimpse of something ahead. Light? No, just a reflection. A flash of movement that didn't belong to the forest, to wind, to any natural phenomenon. Something crouched, watching, waiting. Every instinct screamed to turn and run. Every rational thought told me I had gone too far. Yet I couldn't stop. I had to see it. I had to know. The whispers continued, circling, shifting, layering. My name again. Then fragments of phrases, memories, fears I hadn't known I carried. The forest had become a living memory, a mirror reflecting my own anxieties back at me, reshaping them, magnifying them. My vision caught shapes between the trees. Too fast to follow, too deliberate to be random. I stumbled, nearly falling. My flashlight wavered, illuminating the forest floor in jagged, shifting lines. Footprints again, small, precise, leading further into the darkness. I swallowed, forcing breath into my lungs, trying to push down the rising panic. Step by step, observation, patrol, routine. The whispers grew distinct. My name, again and again, threading through a chorus of indistinct syllables. My mind strained to separate them. Reality itself seemed to bend, twist, overlap. I felt the forest closing in, yet guiding me, forcing me to continue, to follow the traces, to confront whatever was waiting. I reached another small clearing. Moonlight filtered through the pines, pale and cold. The ground was disturbed, small rocks shifted, twigs broken, and then I saw it, a single note pinned with a stone. I bent to read it. The word, carved in uneven letters, was simple yet terrifying. See. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to understand. But the whispers pressed in, the forest pressed in, the darkness pressed in. Step by step, breath by breath, I felt my mind start to fray, reality slipping through my fingers. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a consciousness, and it was aware of me. I realized then, with a clarity that chilled me, that I could not turn back. The whispers, the shapes, the forest itself, they had become part of me, and I had become part of them. Step by step, I moved forward, deeper into the dark, toward whatever waited, toward the inevitable confrontation with something that was patient, watching, whispering my name in the pines. I didn't notice when the forest finally let me go. One moment I was pressed deep into the shadows, the whispers crawling along my skin. The other moment the trees thinned. The road reappeared, asphalt pale under the moonlight. Relief should have come, but it didn't. My chest ached. My legs shook. Every breath felt raw, like the air itself had been tainted by what I'd seen. I slowed my steps onto the road, trying to convince myself that leaving meant safety. That once I reached my cruiser, once the lights of the town were visible again, this would all be behind me. But the forest, it had left a mark. Not on my body, but inside me, a weight I couldn't shake. The headlights of my car reflected off the wet asphalt. I wanted to run to it, throw myself inside, lock the doors, but my feet felt like lead. I could still feel the pressure of those trees, still hear the faintest rustle behind me, even though I was already out. I shook my head. It was impossible. I was on the road now. Nothing could follow me. Nothing could, right? I got in the cruiser, heart hammering, keys fumbling in my hands. Engine roared to life, the hum of it almost deafening in my own ears. I flicked on the headlights, scanning the tree-line one last time. The forest looked empty, innocent even, but I knew better. I had walked among something, and it had walked with me. Quiet, patient, waiting. I drove slowly, almost cautiously, as if the speed would somehow draw attention. Every shadow at the roadside seemed like it could detach itself, could follow me, could bend toward me. My eyes darted, but nothing moved, except for what my mind insisted on seeing. Shadows stretched differently than they should, shapes that lingered just beyond comprehension. The forest was gone behind me, but the feeling of being watched remained. At a turn, I glimpsed movement in the rear-view mirror. My stomach dropped. I slammed my foot down, heart hammering, but it was gone. Nothing. Only the road stretched behind, pale and silent. Still, I couldn't shake it. That weight on my chest, that cold whisper threading through the air. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, rationalization, exhaustion, patrol fatigue, anything, but I couldn't convince myself. By the time I reached the small bridge marking the outskirts of town, I was shaking. My hands trembled on the wheel. The forest had imprinted on me, its rhythm embedded into my bones. Every shadow along the roadside, every twitch of light, every rustle wind now carried possibility. Every corner of my vision felt dangerous, even in the streetlights. I parked near the edge of town, where the quiet of human habitation still offered some comfort. I sat there, engine running, breathing hard. I tried to replay what had happened. trying to separate the real from the imagined, the campsite, the footprints, the symbols, the whispers in the pines. My own name called back at me from the shadows. My eyes swam with memories that may not have been real, my mind trying to stitch a coherent story from fragments that no longer fit together. I rubbed my temples, tried to tell myself I was okay, that it was over. I should have gone straight home, called backup, filed a report, but something in me refused to believe that it was over. The forest had followed me, not physically, no, but it had marked me, touched something inside that couldn't be undone. I drove home, headlights slicing through the fog that had begun to settle over the town. Every streetlight seemed dimmer than usual. Every alley seemed too dark. Every shadow lingered too long. The feeling of being watched never left. I tried to convince myself that it was paranoia, that I was imagining shapes and whispers, but the memory of those eyes in the shadows, the impossible movement, the deliberate footprints, they refused to let me forget. At home, I locked the doors and windows. I checked them twice. Even then, I could feel it. Something at the edge of perception, brushing against my awareness. A whisper I couldn't catch. A shadow that flickered when I wasn't looking. I sat in my chair, flashlight by my side, replaying every moment in the forest, questioning every perception. Was it real, or had I imagined it all? Sleep didn't come. Not that night, not the next. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the creak of floorboards, the wind against the windows, set my nerves on edge. I felt eyes on me. Always. I kept the lights low, windows closed, doors locked. But still, when I closed my eyes, I saw the forest, the trees, the shadows, the shapes crouched, waiting, watching. My name whispered through pines, a lullaby twisted with menace. I tried to rationalize. Patrol fatigue, hunger, imagination, stress. Nothing explained the footprints, the symbols, the traces of recent presence in an abandoned campsite. Nothing explained the voice calling my name. Nothing explained the way the forest felt alive. And yet, I had survived. I had left it behind. I had come home. And still it followed. Work became unbearable. Every routine patrol, every familiar road, carried an edge of tension. Shadows in town now seemed too dark. Every alley, every thicket, every patch of dense trees on the outskirts felt like the forest had extended itself. My eyes darted constantly. My mind replayed the whispers in the pines, the small footsteps, the deliberate carvings in the trees. Trauma seeped in slowly, subtle but persistent, shaping every thought. I couldn't talk about it. Not to anyone. Not colleagues. Not friends. They'd laugh, dismiss it. Fatigue, imagination, too many late-night shifts. But I knew better. I had experienced something. Something deliberate, patient, aware. Something that marked me. And no one else would understand because they hadn't been there. They hadn't felt the weight. Hadn't heard their own name whispered back in the trees. Even when I slept, the shadows came. In dreams, in half-conscious moments, I saw the shapes again. Elongated, crouched, impossible in anatomy. I heard my name. Not softly this time, but clear, insistent, carrying meaning I couldn't grasp. I awoke in sweat, heart racing, unable to shake the impression of those pines pressing down, guiding, observing. I began leaving lights on at home, doors locked, curtains drawn. Still, shadows lingered in the corners of my vision, shifting when I wasn't looking directly. I began hearing the whispers even when I was far from the forest, soft, almost indistinct, weaving through the quiet spaces of my house. My own name, my own memories twisted slightly, reshaped, infused with a presence that shouldn't exist this close to civilization. I avoided the forest entirely. Patrols along its edge became unbearable. I made excuses, changed routes, kept my distance. But still, every glance toward the tree line carried the same weight, the same possibility of recognition, the same subtle accusation that I had been seen and known, and I couldn't shake it. It wasn't fear alone. It was something deeper. The memory of the campsite, the footprints, the symbols, the deliberate whispers, the patient, observing weight of the forest pressing on me. It had invaded a part of me that rational thought could not reach. And that invasion lingered, growing, shaping my perception, reshaping reality itself. I remember what it felt like to follow the footprints, to hear the whispers, to see the shapes crouched in impossible ways, waiting, watching. That memory clung to me, vivid and undeniable. And yet, I questioned every detail. Had I seen it all? Or had exhaustion, fear, and suggestion warped reality into something the forest wanted me to believe? I began writing notes, observations, memories, details, footprints, symbols, whispers, the sequence of events, trying to anchor myself in something real, something concrete. But even the act of writing brought unease. Shadows lingered behind the words, shapes twisted in the periphery. I realized then that the forest had followed me not just physically, but psychologically, imprinting itself into my memory, into my perception, into my sense of reality. Even now I feel it, watching, patient, waiting. I don't know if it's imagination, or if the forest really has extended its presence beyond the trees. I can't tell what's real anymore. Every shadow, every rustle, every subtle change in air or light sets my nerves on edge. And deep down, I know the forest will never let me go. It doesn't need to. I carry it with me now, inside my mind, in my memories. In every glance I cast at shadows that linger just a second too long. The trauma is subtle, creeping. I wake at night, heart pounding, expecting to hear whispers. I avoid certain roads, certain trees, certain patches of dark. I wonder if I'll ever be free of the feeling that I'm still being watched. That whatever was in the pines, whatever followed me, still knows me, still waits. And maybe it doesn't need the forest anymore, because it's already inside me. Even as I sit here, writing this, I can feel it, just at the edge of perception, patient, observing, waiting. Shadows that follow, whispers that never stop, a presence that doesn't need form to exist. And I know, with a certainty that chills me my core, that I will never be alone again. Not really. Not until... I don't even know. I remember the night like it was pressing against my chest. I was sitting in the sheriff's office, alone except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the building settling. It was the kind of night that felt thicker than usual, the fog outside curling along the road like it had weight, pressing on the world, muffling sound, swallowing shapes. The radio crackled once, low and static-wide, the sound making me jump more than it should have. Dispatch to sheriff, possible stalled vehicle, mile marker 23, route 112 visibility nearly zero. Proceed with caution. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the clock. Midnight, always midnight when things got strange. I didn't think, not really. I just grabbed my coat, the old leather one with the shoulder scuff that never quite went away, and slid into patrol car. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. Nights like these always did that to me. The engine hummed to life, and I pulled out onto the road. The fog was waiting, thick and unrelenting, curling around the headlights in a soft, angry haze. I couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me. The trees on either side were tall and black, shadows that felt alive, brushing against the edge of my vision. I kept my speed low, one hand on the wheel, the other hovering near the radio, listening to the silence that stretched like a thin wire through the night. I tried to think about normal things, the diner I'd hit on the way home, the warm coffee waiting in the thermos, but the fog kept swallowing my thoughts. It wasn't just the fog. There was something about the way the road bent ahead, a slight dip, a curve that didn't match the map in my head. The kind of curve that makes you wonder if you ever really knew the road at all. And then I saw it, a car maybe a mile ahead, or maybe just a trick of the headlights. It sat sideways across the road, its hazard lights blinking faintly. The red glow bounced off the fog, flickering in a way that made it feel alive. I slowed, my tires crunching over gravel, and my stomach tightened. It shouldn't have been there. Not this far out. Not at this hour. I pulled up behind it, cut the engine, and let the car idle for a moment. The fog pressed against the glass, leaving tiny droplets on the windshield, and I felt the cold seep into my bones. I stepped out, the door creaking in the quiet, and the world felt like it had shrunk down to the circle of light my flashlight made. The car was old, maybe a mid-90s sedan, dark green, scratched along the side. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. I approached slowly, hand on the holster more out of habit than fear, though the tightness in my chest told me otherwise. The fog swirled around my legs like it had its own will, curling, tugging, almost whispering. "Hello." My voice sounded far in the night. Too loud, too brittle. No answer. Just a faint hum of the engine dying, a sigh that might have been the wind or something else. I crouched near the open door, shining the flashlight inside. The interior was empty. Seatbelt unbuckled. Coffee cup spilled across the passenger seat. A dark stain spreading over the fabric. The smell hit me then. Coffee, yes, but something else underneath it. A faint metallic tang that made my stomach turn. I checked the trunk. Locked. Of course. My mind started to wander, as it always did when the silence stretched, imagining the possibilities. Someone in trouble, yes, maybe a breakdown. But the way the fog pressed against the car, the way it clung like it was watching me, it felt wrong. I radioed dispatch. "Sheriff here. I've got the vehicle, no one inside. Plate reads clear. Stand by for tow." My voice sounded normal over the radio, but inside, my thoughts were slipping, spinning. Stand by for tow. That was a phrase we always used to calm ourselves, to convince ourselves there wasn't something more. As I leaned against the hood, I noticed tracks in the mud beside the road. Fresh, too fresh, bare footprints, large and uneven. Someone had been here recently, or still was. The hair on my neck rose. I glanced back down the road. Nothing, just the fog curling like smoke around the trees. And then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound behind me. I spun, flashlight swinging. Nothing, just the road, white and slick in the headlights, bending away into fog. My heartbeat thudded loud in my ears. I told myself it was nothing. Fallen branches, maybe an animal. But my gut screamed that it was something else. Something patient, waiting. I reached into the car to check the glove box. Nothing but old maps and receipts. As I straightened, the fog seemed to shift. The headlights barely pierced it. But I thought I saw a shape tall, thin, standing just at the edge of the light, and then gone. I blinked, convinced my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe they were. I hoped they were. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every shadow seemed deeper than it should be, every sound sharper, like the night itself was listening. I tried to focus on normal things. The hum of the patrol car's heater, the faint drip of condensation from the roof. But even those were distorted, stretched, and strange. I walked back to the driver's side door. The inside was empty, but something felt off. The seat had a slight indentation, as if someone had just stood up. I shook my head. I was tired. I hadn't slept well for days. Maybe my mind was turning the fog into monsters. But my instincts, the ones that kept me alive on nights like this before, screamed that something wasn't right. I went around the car one more time, flashlight sweeping, eyes scanning. Nothing. The footprints stopped abruptly at the tree line. The fog pressed closer, and the air smelled damp, earthy, and wrong. I got back into the patrol car, doors locking behind me. My hand shook slightly as I started the engine. I told myself to stay calm. Stand by for tow. That was all. Simple. Nothing more. The radio crackled again. "Sheriff, any update?" "Vehicle is empty. Stand by for tow," I repeated, though I added, almost under my breath, "but something feels off." There was static on the line, then silence. I frowned, turned to look back at the car one last time. For a moment, I thought I saw movement inside the fog. Something just past the reach of the headlights. A figure? Or maybe just a trick of the mist? I couldn't tell. And in that moment, I realized the night had shifted, subtly, in a way I couldn't define. It wasn't just fog anymore. It was watching, waiting, patient. I took a deep breath, trying to force my pulse down. I put the car in drive, moving slowly, cautiously, down the fog-swallowed road. Every mile marker felt like a heartbeat. Every shadow a flicker of eyes. The road seemed longer than it should, bending in ways I didn't recognize. I kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see headlights following or something else. Something I didn't want to name. I don't know how long I drove. Minutes? Hours? The fog never lifted, only thickened, curling, pressing, as if it had weight. And the car I found, I kept thinking about it. Empty. The footprints, the smell, the silence, that patient feeling like something had been waiting for me to arrive, like the night had a memory of its own. By the time I saw the first sign of the next town, small and dim through the fog, I was shaking, not just from cold, but from something deeper, a knowledge I couldn't explain. Something had been there, something had been close, something that wasn't meant to be seen at midnight on a rural road. I parked near the station, leaving the patrol car idling. I stepped out, feeling the fog cling to my clothes, my hair, my skin. It felt alive, pressing, breathing. I wanted to leave, to run, but my legs felt heavy, like the night itself was holding me down. I made the report careful, professional, calm, but the words fell hollow. By the time the tow truck arrived, I convinced myself, at least outwardly, that it had been an abandoned car, nothing more. But I couldn't shake it. The feeling of being watched, the footprints stopping at the tree line, the faint drag of something following me through the fog. I couldn't shake the memory of the shadow, just past the headlights. And deep down, I knew the night hadn't ended. It was still there, waiting, patient. I was driving back from the outskirts, the headlights cutting narrow paths through the fog that still lingered like a living thing. The road seemed longer than I remembered, each mile marker slipping past slower than it should. My mind kept replaying the empty car from the night before, the way the footprints had stopped, the faint drag in the mud, the whisper of something unseen brushing at the edges of my senses. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. But there's a part of you that never quite forgets that feeling, that deep, gnawing awareness that something is just beyond your perception, waiting. The radio was silent, just static under the low hum of the engine. I rubbed my eyes, tired, tense, trying to shake off the sense of being watched. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing just at the edge of the road. I hit the brakes instinctively, the tires crunching against gravel. My heart slammed, and my chest tightened like a fist around it. The fog swirled around the figure, shaping it, twisting it, until I wasn't sure if it was human at all. It was tall, thin, and still, completely still, like a scarecrow planted in the mist. I blinked, twice. My eyes adjusted, or I thought they did, and then it was gone. Nothing. The roadside was empty. Just the same fog, curling over the ditch, brushing against the trees. I leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, a shadow caught in the corner of my vision. My mind shouted at me, rational, measured, there's no one there. Just fog, just road, just you. But my body refused to listen. I slowed to a crawl, scanning both sides, the headlights cutting weak lines through the mist. The silence pressed down, dense, filled with a kind of expectation, like the world was holding its breath. And then, again I saw it, further down the road, closer to the tree line this time. The same figure, or something like it, appearing just beyond reach. I tried to make out details. Long coat? Hair? Impossible to tell. The fog clung to it, bending and twisting around its limbs, swallowing edges. I slammed my hands to the horn instinctively. Nothing, just the fog, shifting, twisting as if laughing quietly at me. I wanted to drive past it, to prove it was nothing, but every instinct, every cell in my body screamed not to. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone again. My pulse thundered. My hand shook on the wheel. The fog rolled over the road like a tide, thick and suffocating, and I realized I could no longer see the roadside clearly. I pulled the car to the shoulder, cut the engine, and sat there listening. Nothing. My breath fogged the windshield. I wiped it with the sleeve of my coat and tried to rationalize. It's the night, the fog, exhaustion. That's all. Nothing more. But then the unease sank deeper. I remember the footprints in the car I'd found yesterday, how they stopped abruptly, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into nothing. And now this, a figure appearing and disappearing. I told myself it was unrelated, but the feeling was the same. Patient observation, a quiet hunger in the night. I debated calling it in, but what would I say? I saw a ghost in the fog. My voice would sound ridiculous over the radio, flat and tremulous, so I stayed quiet, listening. The fog seemed to pulse around me, rising and falling with a hum of my own heartbeat. I imagined it pressing against the car, trying to peer inside, twisting shapes into corners I couldn't see. Finally, I made myself drive again, slowly. Each mile felt stretched, elastic, unreal. The fog didn't lift. The trees on either side pressed closer, skeletal fingers clawing at the edges of the headlights. And I kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, half expecting, half hoping, not to see it there. The figure appeared again, closer this time, just at the edge of the right shoulder. I froze. My throat tightened. It looked at me, or at least I felt it look at me. There was an awareness there, something ancient, patient, deliberate. It didn't move, didn't gesture, didn't blink. It simply existed, and then it was gone, swallowed instantly by the fog, leaving only the whisper of wind through the trees. I slammed my hands on the wheel, breath coming fast, chest burning. Every rational thought fled. I wanted to scream, to hit the gas, to do anything to make it stop, but my foot felt glued to the brake. My mind, racing in panic, tried to analyze, to assign logic. Someone playing a prank? A hiker lost? But no, the sense of intent, the patient, quiet watching, wouldn't allow it. My eyes burned from staring, scanning every shadow. I caught fleeting glimpses of shapes in the fog, impossible and wrong. Tree trunks that weren't tree trunks, bends in a road that didn't exist, shadows folding in on themselves. My pulse hammered, and yet I couldn't stop looking. Something was there, just beyond perception, just beyond reach. Something that wanted me to see it, wanted me to feel it. Hours could have passed, or minutes. Time felt thick, suspended. My stomach churned, not just from fear, but from exhaustion, and a creeping awareness that this night wasn't ending. That whatever I was seeing, or thought I was seeing, had been waiting for me long before I arrived. And then, louder than anything else, the sound, a faint dragging, like shoes on gravel, coming from somewhere behind me. I whipped around. Nothing. The fog swallowed sound and shape alike. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. The figure wasn't following me in the headlights, but it was there. I could feel it, pressing against the car, against the night, against my mind. I tried to drive, tried to ignore it, but the road twisted oddly, as if refusing to let me leave. The familiar bend seemed unfamiliar. The distance between markers stretched unnaturally. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Empty. The fog moved differently, curling away, opening space where there should be none. It was taunting me, playing with me. I thought of my father, telling me that night always has memory, that some nights remember more than they should, carry more than they appear to. I had laughed at him once, long ago, but now I understood. This night remembered. It had remembered me before I arrived. It had been waiting. I told myself to calm down, to slow my breathing, to focus. But every muscle in my body tensed against the invisible pressure. I could almost feel the figure, a cold presence brushing along the edges of my perception. It was patient, unhurried, deliberate. It didn't need to move. It simply was. And then I saw something else. A flash in the fog, a movement so quick it was almost imperceptible. Something running along the roadside, just out of reach, yet synchronized with my pulse. My mind screamed to look away, to drive faster, to escape. But I couldn't. My eyes were locked on that space where the fog moved differently, darker, heavier, almost alive. I started talking to myself, low, under my breath. It's just fog, just tired eyes. Nothing there, nothing there. But the words felt empty. They didn't carry weight. They didn't convince me. I felt the night pressing closer, tightening, folding around me like it had been waiting, watching, always. Finally, I reached the first faint glow of lights from the next town. Relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. The fog thinned slightly. The figure did not reappear, but the pressure remained. That unease, that patient observation, did not lift. I realized with a sinking certainty that it never would. The night remembered. It would remember me tomorrow and the night after that. I parked the car in front of the station, stepping out slowly, feeling the fog cling like wet cloth. My hands shook uncontrollably, my mind replaying every glimpse, every disappearance, every stretch of that endless, twisted road. I told myself I'd report nothing unusual, that I'd stick to the facts. But inside, I knew the truth. The figure hadn't vanished. Not really. Not ever. It was patient, watching, waiting, and I had seen it. I couldn't shake it. Even after the fog thinned and the lights of town glimmered faintly ahead, that feeling lingered, coiling tight in my chest. The memory of the vanishing figure gnawed at me, quiet and insistent. I kept thinking about it as I drove, my headlights cutting weak lines into the darkness, revealing patches of muddy road and patches of shadow I couldn't name. I knew I should have gone straight to bed, maybe shut the world out for a while, but I couldn't. Not yet. I noticed the tracks first almost by accident. Tire impressions in the mud, fresh, wide, and irregular, twisting off the paved road onto a narrow dirt path that led into the woods. Something about the way they turned, uneven and deliberate, drew me in. I know better. I've worked these roads for years. I know when to follow and when to leave things alone. But that night, something, call it curiosity, call it stubbornness, call it foolishness, pushed me to follow. The tracks led me through thickening fog again, the air damp, tasting faintly of earth and rot. The road narrowed, lined with trees that bent overhead like gnarled fingers, blocking the moonlight almost completely. My tires crunched over the soft mud, leaving my own marks beside the old ones. The tracks were erratic, sometimes deep, sometimes shallow, almost like the vehicle had skidded or been forced to stop suddenly. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a lost trucker, someone who'd gotten stuck, something mundane. But every instinct I had, the kind that had kept me alive more than once, shouted that this wasn't normal, that the road, the fog, and those tracks were all warning me. And yet, I kept moving forward. After a few minutes, maybe 10, maybe 20, I couldn't tell, the dirt path opened onto a clearing. And there it was, a farmhouse, long abandoned, I thought at first. The paint had peeled in large sheets, with warped and gray. Windows were blacked out with grime and what might have once been plastic sheets, now torn and fluttering softly in a breeze I didn't feel. The porch sagged at odd angles, and the front door was slightly ajar, creaking gently, unnaturally, as if the house itself was exhaling. I stopped the car at the edge of the clearing. The mud squelched under the tires. I stayed inside for a moment, listening. Nothing, or maybe too much. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, makes the walls of your skull throb. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, try to convince myself that a tired mind will see monsters where there are none. But then the sound came again, the slow creak of the door, not pushed by wind, not random with groaning, but deliberate, measured, a rhythm that felt alive. In, out, in, out. My pulse sped, my hands clenched the wheel, and my chest tightened. I told myself I was imagining it, but I knew I wasn't. I got out of the car, boots sinking slightly in the soft mud, and walked slowly toward the house. Every step felt heavy, deliberate, like the night was resisting me, holding me back, making me question why I was here. The air smelled faintly of rot, wet leaves, and something else metallic, tangy, faintly sweet. I couldn't place it, and when I tried, my stomach curled. The porch sagged under my weight as I stepped onto it, each board groaning sharply, sounding louder than it should have in the quiet. The door creaked wider. My flashlight cut a narrow path through the darkness inside. Dust motes hung suspended, caught in the beam, shimmering like tiny stars in a black sky. Inside, the house was worse than I imagined. Old furniture, overturned, broken dishes, rotting cloth, wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling away like dead skin. The air was thick and cold, yet I felt it brushing against me, shifting, almost moving with intent. I took a careful step further in. The floorboards groaned. I whispered to myself, just an old house, just old wood, nothing more. But the feeling didn't leave. The feeling of being watched, of something shifting just beyond the flashlight's reach. I remember the tracks again, the irregularity, the sudden stops, the way they had led me here as if guided. My stomach tightened. I wasn't alone. I moved to the kitchen, or what had once been the kitchen. A table sat crookedly, a few chairs overturned, and the remnants of dishes coated with gray dust. And then I noticed the marks in the mud that had been tracked inside. Small, lighter, and almost human, yet wrong. The way they stopped abruptly near the counter. My pulse jumped. I knew I shouldn't be here, knew I should leave, but my legs moved anyway. I reached for the stairs, leading upstairs. Every step groaned beneath my weight, echoing through the empty house, bouncing back at me in the silence. The hallway was long and narrow, doors on either side, closed doors, and then one slowly, silently, opened by itself. I froze. My mind raced. Rational thoughts shouted at me to leave, but a slower, deeper part of me, the part that had seen the vanishing figure, knew I couldn't just walk away, that whatever was here had been waiting, and it wanted acknowledgement. The door revealed a small room, bare except for a chair turned toward the corner. Dust layered everything like a soft blanket, but the chair was shifted slightly, as if someone had just stood up. I swallowed hard, the air thick in my lungs, tasting of damp wood and rust. The creaking came again, this time from upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps, pacing. Then silence, then a drag, like something being pulled across the floor. I tried to reason it away. Maybe a stray animal, raccoons, squirrels, anything. But the precision, the timing, the way it matched the heartbeat of the house. It wasn't natural, not ordinary. It had intent. I thought of the night before. The vanishing figure, the tire tracks leading to this house. The fog that seemed alive, pressing, observing. And suddenly it all made a kind of sixth sense. Everything had been leading me here. Everything had been orchestrated, patient, deliberate. My flashlight flickered. I shook it, muttering under my breath. My hands trembled despite my effort to stay calm. I felt a presence shift in the air, brushing the back of my neck, warm and cold at once, like a breath I couldn't see. I turned sharply, the beam cutting across the empty room. Nothing, but I could feel it, waiting. Patient, I moved to the window, peering outside. The mud tracks led right up to the porch, ending at my patrol car. Nothing else. No sign of anyone. No footprints in the fresh dirt beyond. But inside the house, I felt it move closer, circling, patient, deliberate. I walked slowly back to the door, every step measured, aware of the groan of each board. The house seemed to respond to me, the floorboards bending and sighing as if alive, holding its breath with me. I reached the hallway. The open door I'd passed before was now closed, softly, almost naturally. But my gut told me it hadn't closed itself. Something had moved it, waiting, observing. I turned to leave, but the air shifted, heavier, pressing against me. The creak of the stairs above resumed, slow, measured, deliberate. I told myself it was an old house settling, but my pulse screamed differently. I had been in these houses before. This wasn't settling. This was watching, waiting, and I had just realized it didn't want me gone. I backed toward the porch, careful not to slip in the mud. Each step felt like resistance, like the house was reluctant to let me leave. Outside, the night had thickened again. Fog rolled in from the tree line, curling, twisting, alive. I reached my car, breath ragged, hands trembling, and slid inside. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the house sighed, or maybe the wind, I don't know. I started the engine and glanced back once. The porch swayed, creaked, and the front door opened slowly again. And for a fraction of a second, I swore I saw something in the doorway. Tall, thin, patient, watching, waiting. I drove off slowly, keeping my eyes on the road, but glancing back repeatedly. The mud tracks disappeared into the trees, swallowed by darkness. But the memory of them, of the creaking doors, of that presence waiting just beyond reach, clung to me. Even now, hours later, I can still feel it. Patient, watching, waiting. The fog, the tracks, the vanishing figure. They're all pieces of something I don't understand yet. Something patient. And I know, deep down, that the house isn't empty. It never has been. It never will be. The fog was thicker than usual that night, pressing against everything like a living thing. I drove slowly down Route 112, headlights cutting thin, trembling lines through the white haze. The air smelled damp and cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. Every mile felt elongated, distorted, as if the world itself had stretched and bent just for me. My pulse kept pace with the hum of the engine, loud and unsteady, though I told myself it was just the tension, nothing more. And then I saw them. Headlights, faint at first, flickering on the edge of perception, like distant stars that had fallen to the road. I blinked, unsure if they were real or a trick of my eyes, but they persisted, wavering in the fog, appearing and disappearing in ways that made no sense. The distance didn't change, no matter how fast I drove. The angles didn't add up. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong, and every instinct also screamed that I had to keep looking. I slowed, my tires crunched over gravel, and I felt the fog press harder against the car. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white, and my stomach churned with a familiar weight of dread. The lights flickered again, dancing, too deliberate, like they were signaling or taunting. I told myself it was another vehicle, a lost driver in the fog, maybe a farmer returning home late. But even as I said it, my mind rejected the explanation. They move erratically, not along the road, but across it, almost sidestepping, vanishing behind patches of fog only to reappear somewhere else. My chest tightened. I wasn't watching headlights. I was watching something that didn't belong to the normal world. Something patient, deliberate, watching me back. I stopped a patrol car in the middle of the road, engine idling, lights cutting weakly through the mist. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel, heart thundering, trying to rationalize. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the fog was playing tricks. But deep down I knew I wasn't alone. The lights flickered closer, or at least they appeared closer. And then, just for a moment, I thought I saw shapes behind them. Shadows, figures, something moving with them, almost synchronized, almost alive. I blinked and they were gone. Just fog, just road, just silence stretching beyond comprehension. I tried to shake it off, telling myself stories I used to tell kids in school, tales of tricks and imagination, things that make a night seem worse than it is. But the unease wouldn't leave. Every instinct, every sense, screamed that I was being watched, and not in the way a deer watches a car. More deliberate, patient, observing, waiting. I drove on slowly, cautiously, my headlights scanning the edges of the fog for a figure, a glint, anything familiar. Every time I thought the lights had vanished, they'd reappear somewhere else, defying logic, refusing to obey the normal rules of distance or speed. My mind raced. Was it a car? No. The movements didn't match any vehicle I knew. Was it a person? No. Too fast. Too erratic. Too impossible. I remember the farmhouse, the vanishing figure, the strange tracks. Everything, the fog, the night, the road, the lights, was connected. Or at least my mind told me it was. And in that moment, I realized that the feeling I'd been ignoring all night wasn't fear of the unknown. It was something worse. It was acknowledgement. The night knew I was here. It had been waiting for me, and now it was speaking. I tried calling dispatch, trying to anchor myself to reality. Sheriff here. Reports of lights moving in fog. Stand by. My voice sounded calm, professional, but I knew it wasn't. My words faltered mid-sentence. There was a static, a hiss, a whisper that felt like it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The fog outside thickened. The lights flickered again. And I swear for a heartbeat, they weren't just lights anymore. They were eyes. I gripped the wheel tighter. The headlights weren't following the road. They moved over the grass, over the ditch, drifting through trees, appearing where they shouldn't. And all the while, I felt the sensation of being watched, not just by the lights, but by something hiding in the spaces of fog left behind, patient, deliberate, waiting. My skin prickled. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand straight. I wanted to look away, wanted to pretend, but my eyes refused to leave the glow. And then the lights flickered one last time and vanished completely. The fog remained, thick and suffocating, pressing against the car as if disappointed that the game was over. I sat for a long moment, breathing hard, listening. Nothing. No movement, no whisper. Just the sound of the patrol car and the faint drip of condensation from the trees. I knew I should leave. I should turn around, head back toward town. Anywhere but here. But my legs moved forward anyway, slow and deliberate. Each mile felt longer, distorted, stretching like the night itself had folded time around me. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every patch of fog shimmered with potential motion. I was being watched, and the knowledge weighed heavy, like a hand pressing against my chest. I tried to focus on normal things. Street signs, mile markers, familiar bends in the road. But the fog had swallowed all points of reference. Everything looked unfamiliar, wrong. I felt my mind slipping, the edges of rationality fraying. I told myself stories again, whispered mantras into the silence. It's just fog, nothing more. But the repetition didn't calm me. It only highlighted the impossibility of the lights, the absurdity of the shapes that had danced just beyond my perception. And then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, I heard it, a shuffle low and soft, somewhere just beyond the headlights. My body tensed. The sound wasn't following the road. It wasn't even near the car, but I could feel it pressing against me, patient, deliberate, waiting. I whispered aloud, though I knew no one could hear me. "What do you want?" No answer, just a fog, thick and unyielding, curling along the sides of the car, brushing against the tires, pressing at the edges of vision. I wanted to run, to accelerate, to escape, but my foot hovered over the pedal, uncertain, as if the night itself had trapped me, holding me in place, forcing me to witness. The lights flickered again, far ahead this time. Near the bend in the road, I thought I knew, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I thought I saw a figure with them. Human? Perhaps. Tall, thin, moving too deliberately, too coordinated. Then the lights blinked out. The figure vanished. Only fog remained. Only silence. Only the pulse of my own fear, thundering through my chest. I kept driving, slower now, cautious, alert. Every patch of darkness seemed to contain movement. Every tree a potential observer. I glanced in the rearview mirror repeatedly, though I feared what I might see. Nothing appeared there. The road behind me stretched endlessly into white, featureless fog. But the sense of being watched did not waver. It didn't fade. It didn't even pause. By the time I reached the first faint glow of the town lights, relief should have washed over me. But it didn't. The fog remained. Or perhaps it had left a memory behind. A residue. The lights in the distance, impossible and fleeting, had imprinted themselves on the world in a way I could feel even now, hours later. My pulse was still uneven. My hands still trembled. And deep down, I knew the lights weren't gone. The road, the fog, the night, they had marked me, watched me, followed me, and I knew, with an icy certainty, that the next time I drove through it, they would be there again, patient, waiting. I parked the car near the station, engine still running, but didn't step out immediately. The fog clung to the edges of town, curling along the streets, pressing against the buildings, twisting in ways that made no sense. I could feel the eyes of night lingering, following me, patient and deliberate. I told myself it was my imagination, but I knew better. Even now, when the fog is gone and the streets are clear, I feel it, patient, watching, waiting. The headlights, the figure, the night itself, they're all pieces of something I don't understand yet, something deliberate, something I cannot outrun. And I know this. Next time I drive these roads, I will see them again. I should have felt relief when I finally pulled into my driveway. The patrol car's engine hummed low in the quiet night, and the house looked the same as it always did. Lights dim, the windows reflecting the porch glow. I should have felt safe. I should have felt normal. But the moment I stepped out of the car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, prickling with a warning I couldn't name. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves, the leftover tension from the fog, the figure, the farmhouse. My house was home, familiar, safe. That's what I kept whispering to myself. But even as I said it, The feeling persisted. Something wasn't right. Something had followed me here, or had never let me go. The key rattled in the lock, and I noticed the faintest shift in the shadows inside, a movement too deliberate to be random. I froze, chest tight, breath caught halfway. The house looked empty. Of course it looked empty, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. It only grew heavier. My hand shook slightly as I turned key and pushed the door open. The living room greeted me with its familiar stillness, but it felt wrong. Too quiet, too measured. The fog, the vanishing figure, the farmhouse, they were all gone, yes, physically gone, but the presence, patient and deliberate, seemed to have followed me home. I could feel it in the corners of the room, pressing softly against my awareness, testing boundaries, waiting. I dropped my coat on the chair and walked through the kitchen, each step deliberate. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, sounding louder than they should have. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it. My rational mind screamed that houses make noises, old with groans. Pipes shift, but my gut told me something else. Something unseen was observing, following, patient. I made my way to the living room window, peering outside at the quiet street. No cars, no fog, nothing, just the familiar darkness of the night. And yet, the unease remained thick and suffocating. I felt eyes on me, not outside the house, but inside, following, waiting. I turned slowly, scanning the room, flashlight from the car still warm in my hand. Nothing, of course nothing. I tried to focus on mundane tasks, checking the mail, setting my coffee to brew for the morning, but the feeling of being watched persisted. It wasn't just a glance over my shoulder or a fleeting shadow. It was patience, deliberate, lingering, constant. It had no shape, no form I could name, yet I knew it existed. I could feel it. I tried to call it imagination, exhaustion, the mind playing tricks after long nights on the road. But I knew better. After the fog, the lights, the farmhouse, I knew better. This presence, whatever it was, didn't care about logic. It didn't obey reason. It only waited, and I was inside its reach now. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift with intent, curling and stretching, subtly changing when I wasn't looking directly at them. I walked slowly, deliberately, through the hallway, checking doors I knew were locked, closets I knew were empty. Every step was measured, careful. I couldn't ignore the feeling, the way the darkness seemed to fold around me, brushing against my awareness. I went into the bedroom, flicked on the lamp, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. The familiar posters on the wall, the bed neatly made, the smell of old wood and faint laundry detergent. It should have been grounding, but even as I settled onto the edge of the bed, I couldn't shake the awareness that I wasn't alone. The shadows shifted subtly, the lamp's light bending oddly across the room, highlighting corners that should have been empty. I remembered the vanishing figure, the lights in the fog, the farmhouse. They all led here. They had been patient, observing. Now I understood that home was no longer safe. The dread that had followed me through the fog, through the miles, through the night, had followed me here. It was patient, deliberate, waiting for me to notice. I tried to distract myself, flipping on the TV, scrolling through channels. The static on one screen made my skin crawl. The shows were normal, the commercials familiar, but the shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, curling against walls, stretching across the floor. My heartbeat thundered. I kept telling myself it was stress, the mind playing tricks, but I knew it wasn't. Not anymore. I walked to the house again, checking each room, flashlight in hand, every creak and groan amplified in my ears. The bathroom, the office, even the basement steps. I checked them all. Empty. Of course they were empty, but the presence persisted, patient and deliberate, pressing at my mind in ways I couldn't name. I could feel it in my chest, a weight, a quiet insistence, a cold awareness. Sitting back on the couch, I try to breathe, try to focus on something grounding, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of the wind against the windows. But the feeling didn't lessen. The shadows seemed to stretch closer, the edges of the room curling slightly, just enough to remind me I wasn't alone, that the night, the fog, the figure, the farmhouse, it had followed me home. I thought about leaving. about driving back out into the fog, try and confront it again. But exhaustion, fear, and a faint hope that the morning light might change things held me back. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to confront. I only wanted to survive the night, to see if dawn would bring relief. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. Not fully. Not ever. I tried to sleep, lying under the covers, lights on, every door locked. My mind raced, recalling the irregular tire tracks, the creaking doors, the vanishing figure, the impossible lights. I could feel it shifting, patient, deliberate, waiting just beyond my perception, just beyond sight. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the weight, the presence, the intent. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt elastic, stretched by fear and awareness. Every small sound, a floorboard creak, the tick of the clock, the hum of the heater, echoed like an intruder. I kept imagining shapes in the corners, figures just beyond the reach of the lamp's glow, curling, folding, observing. My pulse raced, my muscles tense, and I knew that the dread would not end with the shift, not with a patrol car parked in the driveway, not with the familiar walls around me. I thought about calling dispatch again, to report what? Headlights in the fog? A vanishing figure? Strange tire tracks leading to a decrepit farmhouse? The words sounded ridiculous even to me, and yet they weren't ridiculous. Not the feeling, not the patient awareness that followed me, that now lingered in my own home, unseen but unmistakable. I finally turned off the lamp and lay in the darkness, but it didn't bring comfort. The shadows seemed deeper now, thicker, curling toward me, patient, deliberate. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that exhaustion and fear had played tricks on me for nights in a row. But I knew the truth. The night, the fog, the figure, the farmhouse, and the lights, they had left a mark, and that mark had followed me home. I could feel it in the stillness of the house, in the corners that never seemed quite right, in the floorboards that groaned too deliberately under their own weight. I could feel behind me, beside me, pressing softly against my mind, watching, waiting, patient. Sleep eventually claimed me, fitfully, but not fully. Dreams were fragmented, fog curling along the edges of my vision, headlights flickering in impossible ways, a figure appearing just long enough to vanish, leaving only unease. And I woke each time, heart pounding, the feeling still there, patient, deliberate, inescapable. Even in my own home, the dread did not end with the shift. It followed me, lingering in the shadows, curling around corners, pressing against the walls. I understood finally that this was not a night I could leave behind. This was not something I could outrun. The presence, whatever it was, patient and deliberate, had embedded itself into the edges of my life. And I knew, deep down, that every familiar room, every corner, every shadow would now carry its weight. And so I sit, listening to the quiet of the house, feeling the patience in the darkness, the deliberate awareness pressing softly, relentlessly against me, waiting, watching, knowing. I know now that home does not guarantee safety. It never has. And I know, too, that the dread I feel, patient, deliberate, will remain long after the lights of morning burn through the fog. It will always be there. I had been on the road for hours, the patrol car's headlights slicing through the early evening fog that clung to the fields like a damp blanket. It should have been routine, just another call, another isolated farmhouse on the edge of town. The kind of place you drive past 100 times without noticing. But even as I approached, a prickling in the back of my neck made me hesitate. Subtle at first, like static before a storm. The dirt road leading to the farmhouse was narrow, bordered by thick trees that hunched over like they were conspiring to block the sky. My tires sank slightly into the soft mud, leaving clean tracks behind me. The house came into view gradually, a small, weathered building with peeling paint, and windows dim from the fading light. Smoke curled lazily from a crooked chimney. Everything looked normal, too normal. I parked at the edge of the gravel drive, letting the engine idle, and stepped out. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood. My boots crunched softly on the gravel as I walked toward the front door. Something about the place felt wrong. Not sinister, not yet, just off. My hand hovered over the radio, half expecting the usual static or an uneventful check-in. but all I heard was a hum of the engine fading behind me. The first sign came from the animals. Two dogs, large and muscled, bolted from the side yard. Their hackles were raised, teeth bared, growling at nothing. I froze, instinctively stepping back. The dogs' eyes were fixed on something I couldn't see, their bodies rigid, taut with tension. I tried to call them, to calm them, but their snarls only grew louder. Then the chickens scattered, not in random panic, but in coordinated chaos, as if fleeing some predator only they could sense. Claws scratched against the barn door. Wings beat furiously against the walls. Every bird, every creature seemed to recognize something invisible, something present only to them. My pulse quickened. I stepped onto the porch, hand resting on the grip of my service weapon, though I didn't want to draw it yet. The floorboards creaked softly under my weight. I scanned the yard and the nearby tree line. Nothing moved. Not a person, not a vehicle, nothing. Only the stillness of the fading day, punctuated by the frantic movements of the animals. I knocked on the door. Sheriff's office. I called, voice steady but low. No response. The wind rustled through the broken shutters. I tried the handle. Locked. I circled the house slowly, flashlights sweeping over the yard, the barn, the side windows. Every shadow seemed deeper than it should be, stretching unnaturally in the weak beam of light. The dogs still paced near the edge of the yard, growling at nothing, and every so often they would stop, noses raised, listen to something beyond my comprehension, something invisible. I paused near the barn. The chickens were still scattered, but a faint scratching sound came from inside. Slow, deliberate, almost methodical. I adjusted the flashlight, trying to illuminate the space, but the beam caught only shadows. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I remembered the stories, the warnings about this stretch of road, these old farms. Nothing ever happened here. That was the point. Nothing. Routine. Safe. That's why I was here. Routine check. And yet, my gut said otherwise. I moved closer to the barn. The smell hit me first. Ammonia, rotting straw, something metallic underneath it all. My hand hovered over the flashlight switch, trembling slightly. I called softly, trying to hear if anyone was inside. Nothing, only the scratching. Deliberate. Then a sudden movement caught my eye. A shadow darted past one of the windows. Quick, too fast to be human, almost unnaturally so. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, scanning the dark shapes through the glass. The shadow vanished. Only the scratching remained. The dogs barked frantic, suddenly tense, as if reacting to the very air around them. Their eyes were wide, reflecting the flashlight's beam like shards of glass. And then, just as abruptly, they fell silent, motionless, waiting, listening. I couldn't see what they sensed, but I felt it too, a weight pressing in the periphery of my mind, subtle but insistent. I stepped back, hand brushing against the roof of the barn. Every instinct screamed to leave, to retreat to the patrol car, to forget the routine check and go home. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to understand. Had to see. I took a cautious step inside the barn. Dust motes danced in the flashlight's beam. The smell intensified. I heard it then, the faintest scuff of something moving across the floor, deliberate, careful. I swung the light in the direction of the sound. Nothing. Only empty stalls and shadow. My mouth went dry. My pulse raced. I told myself it was rats, or maybe a stray animal. But the air felt heavier here, thicker, pressing against me. The shadows weren't random. They had edges, angles, almost shapes that seemed to shift when I looked directly at them. My mind screamed that I was imagining it, that exhaustion and the long hours had conjured something impossible. And yet, I knew I wasn't. A sudden noise, a low, guttural growl, came from the far corner. I swung the flashlight. Two eyes reflected the beam, unblinking, fixed on me. A dog? No. Too large, too still, too deliberate. The animal, or whatever it was, didn't move toward me. It didn't attack. It just watched, patient, aware. I stepped back, heart hammering, breath shallow. I tried to focus, to rationalize. The routine check was supposed to be simple. Check the house. ensure the animals were safe, maybe talk to the owner if they were home. Nothing here made sense. The air felt alive, thick with something unseen. The animals' behavior wasn't fear. It was recognition, awareness. I glanced around the barn again. More shadows shifted, imperceptibly, curling along the walls, stretching across the rafters. The scratching returned, slower now, deliberate, measured. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run to the car, slam the door, and get back to the safety of town. But my legs moved as if weighed down by some invisible force. Slow, deliberate, cautious. I thought about calling for backup, but my phone was in the car. Even if I ran, even if I reached it, would anyone believe me? The animals are aware of something unseen. Ridiculous. Impossible. Yet my body and my senses screamed that it was real. The scratching stopped abruptly. The air thickened. I could feel it then, like a hand brushing along my spine, a weight pressing just behind my shoulders. I spun, flashlight sweeping, searching. Nothing. Only the dust motes floating in the beam. Only silence. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself, shaking slightly. Routine check. Just a routine check. That's all. But the animals, the shadows, the smell, the weight in the air, they told me it was more than routine. They told me the night had eyes, and those eyes were aware. I backed toward the barn door slowly. The dogs had settled near the edge of the yard, eyes still fixed on something I couldn't see. The chickens had gathered in a tight group, heads raised, staring into the darkness beyond the barn. And I understood, suddenly, that I wasn't being watched for a moment or a minute. I was being observed. Patiently, deliberately, I stepped out into the yard. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting wood. The fog had crept closer, curling along the ground, wrapping around the farmhouse like smoke. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get back to the patrol car, to drive away and never return. I didn't argue. My boots sank into the mud as I walked back to the car. The animals watched silently. The barn remained quiet, still, but I could feel it. The air, the space, the shadows. Something waited, just out of reach, deliberate and patient. Something that I could not name, could not see, but could feel pressing against my awareness. I slid into the patrol car, engine roaring to life, and glanced back one last time. The farmhouse stood silent, empty, or at least it seemed empty. The fog wrapped it like a shroud. The dogs remained still, the chickens huddled together, and the air seemed charged, thick with something unseen, deliberate, aware. I drove away slowly, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, heart hammering, pulse racing. The night stretched endlessly, fog curling along the road, pressing against the car. I couldn't shake the sense of observation, of patient, deliberate awareness. Even as the lights of town appeared, distant and reassuring, I knew something had followed me, not physically, not in the way a person follows, but in the weight of the night, in the lingering presence of my mind, in the memory of the animal's eyes. Something patient, something aware, waiting. I would remember that farmhouse, that yard, the sounds, the smells, the scratching. I would remember the feeling of being watched by something unseen, something deliberate. And I knew deep down that this routine check was far from routine. The dread didn't end when I left. Not on the road. Not back in town. Not even when I finally parked the car at home. Safe, familiar, ordinary. It lingered. Patient. Deliberate. A reminder that some things, once noticed, never truly let go. And I could feel it. Eyes in the fog. Eyes in the shadows. Always aware. Always watching. The stairs groaned beneath my weight as I climbed. Each step deliberate, careful, almost hesitant. The air upstairs was different, heavier, warmer somehow, thick with a faint smell of dust and old wood. I told myself it was just the house settling, that my imagination was playing tricks after hours in the fog and the empty farmhouse. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. Something had changed. Something had shifted since I first stepped inside. The hallway stretched before me, narrow and dimly lit. Wallpaper curled to the edges, faded and peeling, and the floorboards beneath me whispered with each cautious step. I passed the first door, then the second. Both were closed, both silent. But I felt it then, a subtle shift in the air, like a faint exhale, a presence, deliberate and patient, pressing just at the edge of my perception. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tighter. Then I saw the door at the end of the hall. It wasn't the first door that caught my attention. It was the last one, small, painted pale yellow, with tiny stars etched in the peeling paint. The doorknob was cold in my hand, metal slick and slightly warm, as if it had been touched recently. I hesitated. Every instinct in me told me to leave it alone, to walk back down the stairs and never return. But I couldn't. I needed to know. I turned the knob slowly. The door didn't resist. It swung open with the faintest squeak, revealing a room bathed in dim, uneven light. Toys littered the floor, blocks stacked haphazardly, dolls leaning against the wall, a small train track running in a perfect circle. Nothing seemed out of place at first, nothing alive. And then I noticed a movement. A block toppled over, then another, as if nudged by an invisible hand. The train rocked slightly on the track, chugging back and forth with no mechanism, no sound, only motion. A doll's head tilted just enough that it seemed to glance at me, eyes reflecting the beam of my flashlight. I swallowed, throat tight, heart hammering. I stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath me. Every instinct screamed that I shouldn't be here, that I should retreat, but my legs moved forward anyway. The toys shifted subtly, always just at the edge of vision. Blocks toppling, trains moving, dolls tilting. Always deliberate, always measured. I bent down, inspecting the track. No batteries, no mechanism, nothing, yet it moved. A soft whisper grazed my ear, or maybe it was the wind or my own imagination. I couldn't tell. The hair on my arm stood on end. I shined the light across the room. Shadows stretched in ways that made no sense, curling along walls, pooling under the bed. The doll's eyes seemed to follow me, patient, deliberate, aware. I thought about the house downstairs, the locked doors, the barn, the farmhouse, the fog. Everything had been patient, deliberate, and now it was here, in this small, pale room, pressing against my awareness, watching, waiting. I moved toward the center of the room. The blocks shifted again, toppling in a precise pattern, forming a line pointing toward the closet. My pulse quickened. I felt my breath catch in my chest. I told myself it was a wind, that the house was settling, that my mind was playing tricks. But the pattern deliberate, not random, not accidental. I approached the closet. Door closed, paint chipped, knob cold. I hesitated, then reached out slowly. The air around me thickened, warm and pressing, like the room itself was holding its breath. I twisted the knob. The door swung open silently. Inside, the closet was empty, or at least it appeared empty. Just coats, shoes, boxes of old clothes. And yet, I felt it. Patient, deliberate, aware. Something was in the room with me, unseen, shifting just beyond my perception. The toys continued their subtle movements, blocks toppling, trains rocking, dolls tilting. All of it felt like a message, a warning. I stepped back from the closet. The room seemed to stretch slightly, edges curling in my peripheral vision. I shined the flashlight on the bed. The doll lying there had changed position, not dramatically, just enough that I couldn't ignore it. Its head tilted toward me now, eyes glinting in the dim light. A soft thud echoed from the floor. I spun. A block had fallen from the edge of the train track. I bent down to pick it up. Another thud, another block, always deliberate, always timed, almost patient in the way it happened. My pulse raced. My hands trembled. I wanted to leave, wanted to run down the stairs, out the door, away from the room, the house, the weight pressing against me. And yet I stayed. I moved toward the window, pulling aside the thin curtain. The fog outside had rolled in closer, blanketing the yard in white. The familiar trees hunched over the edge of the field, gnarled and twisted. For a moment, the room felt almost normal, almost safe, but only for a heartbeat. The toys moved again. A block slid across the floor toward the center. A small doll's arm lifted slightly. The train rocked faster, chugging in perfect rhythm with something. I couldn't place it. My throat tightened. My mind raced. Rational explanations failed. Exhaustion failed. Logic failed. What remained was a weight pressing against my awareness. Patient, deliberate, Waiting. I thought about the sheriff's calls I had taken before this check. Reports of strange sounds, objects moving, animals reacting to nothing visible. The fog, the vanishing figure, the farmhouse, all of it led here, led to this room, to this moment. And now I understood. This wasn't just a house, a routine check, or a simple call. This was a place alive in ways I couldn't name, patient and aware, deliberate in its observation. I stepped back from the window. Shadows twisted along the walls again. The toys shifted subtly, forming new patterns, pointing, indicating, deliberate. I could feel it pressing against me, filling the small room with an awareness that was not mine. Watching, waiting. I bent down to inspect the train. No batteries, no mechanism. The blocks remained in their pattern, deliberate, forming a line that stretched toward the corner of the room. I shined the flashlight on the corner. Shadows pooled there, curling oddly as if alive, moving in ways that defied physics, defied understanding. My pulse thudded in my ears. Breath came fast and shallow. I swallowed. I told myself it was imagination. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself it was the weight of hours spent in the fog, on the road, in the farmhouse. But deep down I knew better. Something unseen was here, patient, deliberate, observant, and the toys were only the beginning, the first signs of its awareness, its intelligence. I stepped toward the door, flashlight sweeping. Blocks toppled in a small cascade behind me. A final message, deliberate, precise. I didn't look back. Not fully. Not yet. My instinct screamed to leave, to retreat, to abandon the house, the room, everything. I reached the hallway. The air shifted again, warmer, pressing, curling around me. I could feel the presence moving just beyond the threshold, patient, deliberate, aware. My boots echoed on the old wood as I descended the stairs slowly, cautiously. Each step measured, deliberate, careful. The room remained behind me, but I could feel it. Patient, observant, waiting. The toys, the blocks, the train, the doll's eyes, they weren't just objects. They were eyes. They were awareness. And I understood fully that the house, this room, this place, it was alive in ways I could not name, ways I could not fight, ways I could not outrun. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The air was cooler, thinner. Shadows of the living room stretched long and dark. The house seemed normal again, almost benign, but I knew better. The children's room, upstairs, remained patient, deliberate, aware, waiting. Even as I stepped outside, into the cool evening air, I knew it followed me. Not physically, not in the way a person might follow, but in the awareness it had imprinted, in the weight pressing on my mind, patient and deliberate. The toys were only the beginning. The room, the house, the presence, none of it would let go. Not tonight. Not ever. I drove away slowly, eyes flicking to the rear-view mirror. The farmhouse receded into the fog, distant, quiet, but the dread remained, thick and deliberate, pressing against my awareness. I knew, with certainty, that the room upstairs, with its toys moving without explanation, its deliberate, patient awareness, would never truly leave me. And I understood fully that this was only the beginning. I shouldn't have been up there. I knew that the second I climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, my boots creaking against the old wood, but something in me, curiosity, stubbornness, or perhaps the need to understand what was happening, propelled me forward. The hallway stretched behind me in dim light, shadows pooling in every corner. I could feel the weight of the house pressing against me, patient, deliberate, aware. The attic door was old, warped slightly with age. The knob felt cold in my hand, slick from the sweat. I didn't realize I was producing. I paused, listening. Nothing, just the hum of the wind outside, the faint creak of the house settling. I told myself it was nothing, just routine check nerves. But deep down, I knew better. I opened the door slowly. The attic greeted me with stale air and the scent of aged wood, insulation, and dust that had been undisturbed for decades. My flashlight cut a narrow path across the slanted ceiling, revealing stacks of boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, and shadows that seemed deeper than they should be. For a moment, I told myself it was just the attic, empty, quiet, harmless. And then I heard it, Footsteps, slow, deliberate, above me, not the creak of the house, not the settling of floorboards, but something heavier, purposeful, a rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause. I froze. My breath caught. I strained my ears. The attic above me shouldn't have been accessible. No stairs, no ladder, nothing. And yet, the sound continued. Patient, deliberate, aware. I told myself it was a branch scraping the roof, or perhaps an animal. But my gut screamed otherwise. This wasn't random. This wasn't nature. This was deliberate. Someone or something was moving above me, watching me, testing me. I shifted my weight, trying to peer into the far corners of the attic. Shadows pulled and twisted as if alive, curling along walls and furniture, folding into corners where light refused to reach. My pulse thudded in my ears. The sound of footsteps grew slightly louder, closer, then paused, as if acknowledging my presence. I gripped the flashlight tighter, knuckles white. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm was unrelenting, deliberate, patient. I called out, voice low, shaking slightly. Hello? Anyone up there? No answer. The air in the attic seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin. My breath fogged faintly in the beam of the flashlight. Shadows shifted subtly, curling toward me, then retreating. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I could feel the awareness pressing into space above me. Deliberate, patient, impossible to define. I tried to rationalize. It could be a stray animal trapped in the eaves, a branch or loose shingle. Old houses creak. They groan. But the rhythm, deliberate, purposeful, patient. It wasn't random. And the weight of it, the awareness, I could feel pressing down, insistent, almost sentient. Step, pause, step, pause. I swallowed, throat dry. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to abandon the attic, the house, everything. But something held me there. Fear, yes, but also curiosity, need, a compulsion to understand what I was hearing, what I was feeling, what was patient and deliberate just beyond perception. I edged forward slowly, boots crunching softly on the old wood, the boxes and furniture cast long, wavering shadows in the beam of the flashlight. I felt it then, the weight of eyes, patient and deliberate, observing me, not visible, not tangible, but pressing, insistent, aware. Step, pause, step, pause. I leaned over a stack of boxes, trying to glimpse the far corner of the attic. The flashlight trembled slightly in my hand. Shadows twisted. Something moved just beyond the reach of the beam. Subtle, deliberate. I could feel it. Patient, watching, waiting. I told myself to focus, breathing steady, rational mind engaged. Nothing in the attic was alive. Nothing in the house could move like this. And yet, every step above me, every deliberate pause, told a different story. Someone or something was here, patient, deliberate, observant. I thought about the farmhouse, the fog, the vanishing figure, the children's room. All of it, the house, the toys, the presents, had been patient, deliberate, aware, and now it was here in the attic, pressing against me, insistent, impossible to ignore. Step, pause, I stepped closer to the far wall, flashlight sweeping, boxes stacked high, draped furniture, dust motes floating in the light. Nothing tangible, nothing physical, only the rhythm. Step, pause, and then a shift, a pause longer than before. A breath almost, felt rather than heard. I froze, my pulse thundered, my chest tightened. The attic seemed to stretch, shadows pooling, curling in ways that made no sense. The awareness pressing harder, deliberate, patient, almost sentient. I told myself it was imagination, exhaustion, long hours on patrol, but I knew it wasn't. Step, pause. I whispered again, voice low, almost inaudible. Who's there? Nothing. And then, for the briefest moment, I could feel movement elsewhere, subtle, shifting in the corners of the attic, behind furniture, beyond the light. Not tangible, not human, but aware, patient, deliberate, testing me, acknowledging my presence, observing my reactions. I backed toward the stairs slowly, flashlight scanning. Shadows pooled along the wall, stretching, curling, folding. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm persisted, now behind me, as if following, keeping pace, patient and deliberate. I wanted to run. I wanted to throw open the attic door and flee down the stairs, out of the house, away from the weight pressing on me. But my legs moved cautiously, each step deliberate, aware. The awareness, patient and deliberate, pressed against me, observing. Step, pause. I reached the top of the stairs, flashlight illuminating the railing, the hallway below. The sound above me paused, longer now, deliberate. I could feel the weight of observation pressing in, almost tangible, insistent. Shadows twisted subtly, folding along corners, pooling beneath the beams. I tried to speak again, voice steadier now, though tremors lingered. I know you're there. I know you're aware. What do you want? No answer. The attic seemed to breathe. The air shifted, warmer, heavier, pressing softly against me. I could feel it in my chest, a weight I couldn't name, a deliberate awareness. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm continued, impossible, relentless, patient. I edged toward the attic door. Shadows twisted in the beam of the flashlight. Dust floated lazily, disturbed by nothing. Every instinct screamed to leave. Every rational thought told me to descend, to escape. But something held me in place. The rhythm, the presence, the patient observation. It demanded acknowledgement. Step, pause, step, pause. I finally reached the door. The air around me thickened, pressing, curling like smoke. I gripped the knob, cold, slick. Step, pause, step, pause. I twisted it slowly. The door resisted for a heartbeat, then swung open silently. The hallway greeted me, dim and familiar, but the weight remained. Patient, deliberate, observant. I descended the stairs carefully, each step deliberate, conscious of the presence still pressing from above. Step, pause, step, pause. The attic was behind me, but I could feel it lingering, watching, aware. Every instinct screamed it was not finished, that the weight of observation would follow me, patient, deliberate, persistent. Reaching the first floor, the air seemed thinner, cooler. Shadows stretched along the walls, but no movement, no sound, only the memory of the rhythm, patient, deliberate, impossible to shake. The house seemed quiet again, but I knew better. The attic, the presence, the deliberate awareness. None of it would leave. Not tonight. Not ever. I stepped outside, night air cold and damp against my face. The stars were hidden by clouds. The house behind me seemed benign, ordinary, but I knew better. The attic had marked me, imprinted its patience, its observation, its deliberate awareness into my mind. And I understood fully that it would follow me, in dreams and memory, in the subtle shadows that lingered in the corners of my vision. Step, pause, step, pause. Even now, long after I left the house, I can feel it, patient, deliberate, observant, waiting. And I know deep down that the attic, the house, the presence will never truly release me. Not entirely. Not ever. And the rhythm persists, patient, deliberate, unyielding. Step, pause, step, pause. The basement door groaned when I opened it. The metal hinges stiff with age. The air that poured out was damp and cold, carrying the sharp tang of earth and mildew. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, hand gripping the railing. Flashlight aimed down into the black. The beam wavered slightly. My pulse did too. I had been in basements before. Plenty of them. Old houses, abandoned barns, cellars filled with junk and memories. Nothing prepared me for the feeling that hit as I stepped onto the first stair. The air was heavier here, thicker, pressing against my chest like it had weight. I swallowed, trying to calm my nerves. Routine check. That's all this was. Just a routine check. The steps creaked under my boots as I descended. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching unnaturally, folding over themselves. My flashlight cut a narrow path across the stone walls, across shelves lined with jars, tools, cobwebs, the detritus of a life left behind. The air smelled older the further down I went, and I felt a tightness in my chest, A subtle pressure at the base of my skull, like someone or something was aware I was there. And then I saw it. Scratches, carvings, symbols etched deep into wood beams and the stone walls. Some crude, others intricate, spirals and lines that made no sense, intersecting in patterns that felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. I stepped closer, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The carvings were old, decades, maybe longer. The wood splintered where symbols were gouged, faint traces of rusted nails embedded in some. The stone bore strange scratches, sharp and jagged, some faintly bleeding into the mortar. My stomach turned. I took a step back, trying to process. The basement had always been part of routine checks, places I walked through 100 times without a second thought. This wasn't routine. This was deliberate, patient, awful. The symbols pressed against my perception, like they were meant to be noticed, meant to communicate something I wasn't supposed to understand. I ran a gloved hand across one of the symbols carved into a support beam. The grooves were rough, almost warm under my touch, as if the wood had absorbed some life from the years. My fingers trembled. I knew I shouldn't touch anything, shouldn't linger, but my curiosity, my compulsion to understand, was stronger than my fear. The air seemed to thicken around me. Shadows pooled beneath shelves and around corners, curling and folding in ways that made no sense. My breath came shallow, rapid. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not when the carving stared at me. Patient, deliberate, aware. I noticed small objects scattered among the shelves. Broken dolls, tiny tools, feathers, shards of glass embedded in wax, arranged deliberately. Nothing random. Every piece had a place, a purpose, though I cannot name it. The thought struck me cold. Whoever, or whatever, made this had a mind beyond my understanding. Patient, deliberate, observant. I stepped further into the basement. My boot sank slightly into the damp earth floor, leaving print behind me. I felt the presence before I saw it, pressing against me, patient and deliberate, aware. It wasn't visible. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it in every nerve ending, crawling beneath my skin and my chest, behind my eyes. Then I saw more carvings, on the floor this time, scratched deep into the stones, spirals and lines intersecting, forming patterns that made my stomach twist. Some symbols looked like eyes, others like hands reaching, clawing, patient, deliberate. I felt the weight of them pressing into my mind. The flashlight flickered. I shook it, breath catching. When it steadied, the carving seemed different, moved, impossible. I had been staring at them only moments ago, and yet some shapes were slightly rearranged, shifted, deliberate in ways that defied explanation. My chest tightened. The presence around me thickened, like the air itself was aware, alive, patient. I stepped back, bumping into a crate. Dust rose in the weak beam. The symbols seemed to pulse in my vision, faintly, rhythmically, deliberate. My pulse thundered in my ears. The air felt heavier with every heartbeat, pressing against me, patient, deliberate, impossible to ignore. A faint scraping sound came from the far corner, slow, deliberate, patient. I froze, flashlight trembling in hand. I scanned the basement. Nothing visible moved. Yet the sound persisted, small and deliberate, like fingernails across wood. I couldn't see its source, couldn't name it, but I knew it wasn't random. Step, pause, scratch, pause. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Every rational thought failed me. Exhaustion, fatigue, paranoia. They couldn't explain the weight pressing down, patient and deliberate. The carvings, the objects, the sound, they were all part of it. Observant, aware, waiting. I edged closer to the far wall. Symbols that were darker, more intricate. Lines intersected. Spirals nested within circles. Shapes that seemed impossible to draw with human hands. I reached out to touch one. The air shivered against my skin, and for a brief instant, I could feel it. An intelligence, deliberate, patient, observing me. I jerked my hand back, heart hammering, my pulse racing. I stepped back toward the stairs. The presence pressed heavier, almost tangible, patient and deliberate, aware. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching across the floor, curling along shelves, moving just beyond the flashlight's reach. I could feel them patient, observing, marking my every step. I tried to rationalize again. Maybe a previous tenant, someone deranged, maybe natural erosion or old construction marks. But the deliberate arrangement of objects, the pulsing, shifting carvings, the press of awareness in the air, none of it made sense. Rational explanations failed. Logic failed. Only the wait, patient, deliberate, aware, remained. A soft scraping sound returned. Closer now, deliberate, careful. I froze. My breath caught. The flashlight beam swung toward it. Nothing. Only shadows, deepening and folding in ways that made my stomach knot. The symbols seemed to pulse again. I realized with a sinking certainty. They weren't just marks. They were signs of awareness, patient, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I wanted to leave. I wanted to abandon the basement, the house, everything. But I couldn't. Not yet. The presence was patient, deliberate, observing, almost inviting me to understand, or perhaps warning me. I didn't know which. And yet I stayed, compelled, heart racing, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, every deliberate carving and arrangement. The air shifted slightly, colder now, pressing along my neck and shoulders. Dust motes drifted lazily in the flashlight's beam, as if slowed by invisible hands. I felt it again, patient, deliberate, aware. The carvings, the objects, the scratches. They were alive in ways I could not name, but I could feel in every nerve, every breath, every heartbeat. I stepped closer to a cluster of jars, each containing something unrecognizable. Shards of bone, feathers, tiny trinkets, deliberately arranged. The symbols on the wall seemed to pulse in response. I could feel the weight of attention, patient, deliberate, pressing against me. The basement, the house, the presence. It was aware, always aware, observing, waiting. I backed toward the stairs, flashlight sweeping, every instinct screaming to leave. The carvings and object were patient, deliberate, alive. The weight pressed harder. Shadows curled in the corners, twisting unnaturally. I could feel its gaze on me, pressing, aware, impossible to escape. Step by careful step, I ascended. The basement seemed to push against me, patient, deliberate, aware. Every heartbeat thundered. Every breath trembled. Shadows clung to the edges of the stairs, to the floor, to the walls. I could feel it, patient, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I emerged into the hallway. Air seemed lighter, cooler. Shadows receded. But the weight remained. Patient, observant, deliberate. I knew, with sickening certainty, that the basement, the carvings, the symbols, the objects, they would never truly leave me. Not tonight. Not ever. Even as I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the memory pressed against my mind. Patient, deliberate, observant, waiting. The dread settled deep, not in my chest, not in my stomach, but deep in my bones. I could feel it lingering, patient, deliberate, aware, impossible to ignore. And I understood fully with the clarity of fear that this house, this basement, and whatever presence occupied it was patient, deliberate, aware, watching, waiting, always waiting. I shouldn't have been out here. I keep telling myself that, even as I drive slower, the headlights barely cutting through the thick gray fog curling over the river. There's something wrong tonight, the way the mist clings to everything, and I can feel it pressing against my chest like a weight. It started with a call. Late, of course. Why does it always happen late? The dispatcher's voice was calm but tight, like she knew I'd hear it and roll my eyes before I even left the station. Sheriff. Someone reported lights near the river. Not fire, not car, just lights. She hesitated, then added, "Thought you should know." That's all it took. I'm a sucker for the unknown. The road was empty. The kind of empty that makes the silence louder than a screaming child. Trees leaned over the asphalt, skeletal fingers scratching at the edges of my windshield. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing, just the fog following me like a shadow. I knew it would be thick near the river. It always is. But tonight it felt different. Heavy, deliberate. I parked near the old bridge, the one that creaks even when no one's on it. The boards groaned under my boots as I walked closer to the water. The river's surface was a dull black mirror, barely reflecting the pale moon hidden behind layers of fog. And then I saw them, faint flickers of orange, floating just above the water like lanterns adrift. They moved, slow, almost hesitant, as if testing the edges of reality. I reached for my radio. Dispatch, I'm at the bridge. There are lights, not like campfires. They're hovering. My voice sounded wrong, even to me. Too steady, too controlled. The fog swallowed the sound immediately. The radio crackling back with silence. My stomach twisted. I stepped closer to the riverbank. The mud sucked at my boots. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the earth itself was warning me to turn back. And I wanted to. I wanted to leave. But something, a mix of curiosity and that damn pride, kept me moving forward. The lights pulsed faintly, and I noticed how they seemed almost alive, like they were breathing along with me. I squinted, trying to make sense of them. Lanterns? No. Too small, too erratic. A reflection? Maybe, but the river was too calm, too glassy. Then I heard it, a soft humming, low and insistent, vibrating through the fog. It wasn't loud, but it carried in a way that touched my bones. I froze. My hand hovered over my holster. The rational part of me screamed that it was nothing, that it was just the wind over the water, the fog playing tricks. But deep down I knew better. I always know. A shape appeared, or maybe it revealed itself. I couldn't be sure if it was on the water or in my mind. A figure, tall, unnaturally thin, draped in something dark that flowed like smoke. It didn't move the way a person moves, more like a shadow with intention. The lights, the ones floating, clustered around it, orbiting in a slow, deliberate pattern. I wanted to speak, to call out, but my throat had dried up. My hands shook, but not from fear, not entirely. It was more like recognition, as if my brain was trying to tell me, "You've seen this before, somewhere you don't remember." I blinked. The figure didn't vanish, didn't even shift. It just stayed there, patient, waiting. The fog thickened suddenly, rolling in faster than it had any right to. I could barely see my own hands now, let alone the figure. The lights flickered and dimmed. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move closer. My boots sank into the muddy bank, pulling at me like the river wanted to claim me. Then, just like that, the lights snapped off. Gone. One moment they were there, pulsating softly. The next, nothing. The river looked like any other river. The fog hung heavy. The world reduced to gray. I laughed, but it was brittle, sharp against the silence. Figures, I muttered. I see something, it disappears. That's the law of this place. I tried to call in again. Dispatch? Did you copy? The lights? No answer. The radio was dead. Static at first, then nothing. Just the fog, the river, and me. My breath came out in ragged clouds. I knew I should leave, and I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But every instinct I had screamed to keep watching, to not blink, to not let it slip away. I stepped forward, and the ground beneath me shifted. Not mud, not water, something soft, pliable. My boot sank deeper than it should have. I caught myself just in time, heart hammering, and peered down. Nothing, just the black muck of the riverbank. My mind played tricks. I told myself, "You're tired. You're imagining things." But the river, it wasn't calm anymore. Ripples appeared, small, concentric, as if something beneath had just moved. And the humming returned, louder now, almost a chant, though I couldn't understand it. My ears rang. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't help. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was more presence. I wanted to run. I should have run. But there was a part of me that stayed rooted to the spot, staring, straining, hoping for some explanation I would never get. The fog seemed to lean closer, hugging the water's edge, curling around the bridge, seeping into my clothes. My skin crawled. I remember thinking about the old reports, the stories from decades ago, the ones about strange lights, missing fishermen, people wandering off into the mist. I never believed them. Never. Until tonight. And then I saw it again, faintly at the river's edge. Just a shimmer this time. A distortion like heat rising off asphalt. My stomach lurched. It wasn't a person, not fully. It wasn't a shadow either. It was wrong. Too tall, too fluid. And the river, the fog, the air itself seemed to bend around it. I called out. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the mist. "Hey, who's there?" The words felt ridiculous even as I said them. Silence answered. Only the river hummed now, soft and low. I backed up, not taking my eyes off the shimmer. My mind raced. Rational thoughts struggled against the surge of something primal. Something older than the town, older than the river. I wanted to rationalize it, give it a name, something tangible. But I couldn't. There was nothing to hold on to. And then my radio crackled. Just for a second, a voice, distant, distorted. "Share or don't." It cut out before it finished. My heart jumped. My grip tightened on the flashlight. I spun, scanning the fog. Nothing. The lights didn't return. The figure didn't either. Only the fog, thick and unrelenting. My chest ached with tension I couldn't release. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. I finally did, turning back toward the patrol car. Each step was measured, careful, as if the mud itself would try to pull me back. I glanced over my shoulder. Just fog. The bridge groaned in the wind. The river reflected nothing but gray. But I knew it had been there. Watching. Waiting. I could feel its awareness, like cold fingers tracing the spine of my mind. Back in the car, I locked the doors. Hands trembling, I reached for the radio. "Dispatch. This is static. Nothing else." I shut my eyes for a moment, leaning back in the seat. My chest heaved. Every nerve was taut, alert. I felt wrong. Not scared in the usual way, but something deeper. A tremor in my perception of reality. Like the ground beneath me had shifted, and I hadn't noticed until now. I drove back slowly, fog swallowing the headlights, the river disappearing behind me. I kept checking the rear view mirror, half expecting to see something. Someone following, but there was nothing. Only the endless gray and the echo of that humming, lingering in my mind, even as the road curved and the town lights came into view. I can't explain it. I don't know what I saw, what I heard, but I know it was real. Real in a way that makes you doubt everything else, makes the world feel hollow and thin. Real enough that tonight, and maybe for nights to come, I'll hear that humming in my sleep, and I'll know it's waiting for me to come back. I'm not sure I want to go back, but I know I will. I always do. I shouldn't have come back. I know that now, as I sit here, staring at the riverbank that swallowed my sense of safety last night. But the lights, the fog, I can't stop thinking about them. They weren't just tricks. They weren't reflections. They were alive in some way that makes your skin crawl when you try to put it into words. I arrived at the bridge just after midnight, my flashlight cutting feeble lines through the fog. The town was dead silent. No distant hum of cars, no barking dogs, no drunk kids laughing in alleys. Just me, the fog, and the river. I had hoped that returning would offer clarity, maybe even comfort, but the moment I stepped onto the muddy bank, I realized comfort was gone forever. The water was still unnaturally so, not like any river I'd seen, even on the calmest night. There was a sheen to it, like oil or the surface of a mirror someone had pressed their finger against and left smeared. And there it was, pale and motionless, floating in the shallow bend. At first, I thought it was a body. My stomach turned, while rising in my throat, but even as I leaned closer, I knew it wasn't quite human. Not fully. The figure was pale, too pale, its skin almost translucent under the weak moonlight. Hair clung to its face in wet strands, and its eyes, dark and wide, seemed empty, endless. I swallowed, trying to force calm over the fear tightening my chest. I should have called it in, should have left. My hand hovered over my radio, but the words stuck somewhere between thought and sound. I couldn't bring myself to speak them. Not yet, not while it just floated there, serene and impossible. I took a cautious step closer, and the water around its legs didn't ripple. Not a single wave. My flashlight trembled in my grip. I tried to remember what made sense. I tried to tell myself it was someone unconscious, someone who needed help. But something about the way it hovered, impossibly still, told me otherwise. I squatted at the edge, my fingers brushing the cold mud. "Hey, you okay?" The word sounded ridiculous. Weak. Too human. I waited. Nothing. Not even a breath. Not even the faintest shiver of water. I tried again, louder this time. "I can help you. You need help." Still nothing. The figure didn't react. No blink, no twitch, no shudder. It was like staring at a photograph of a person someone had left in water and forgot about, frozen in time. I swallowed hard and took another step closer. The river lapped quietly at my boots. My breath came out in foggy clouds, the only sound breaking the eerie silence. The figure seemed to tilt its head ever so slightly. Or maybe I imagined it. My mind, desperate for movement, for confirmation that it was real, twisted the shadows into something tangible. I leaned forward. My hand shook. I wanted to touch it, to confirm that flesh and blood existed beneath that pale, ghostly skin. But as I stretched my hand toward the water, it moved. Not quickly, not with panic or intention, but it floated upward, just enough that I could see its chest, rising slowly, unnaturally, like a doll bobbing in a bath. I stumbled back. My heart thundered, my legs barely holding me upright. "No, no, no, no," I whispered to myself. The fog thickened, as if it were answering me, curling tighter around my body. I swung the flashlight, trying to see all of it at once, and that's when I noticed its eyes. Empty, hollow, and yet to where, like it could see past me, past the river, past the fog, straight into something I wasn't ready to confront. My stomach turned again. I wanted to run, but my boots were anchored to the soft earth. My body betrayed me, locked in place while my mind screamed to escape. I tried to reason with myself. It's just a person, probably drunk, maybe a kid who fell in, or an old man trying to fish. My voice sounded foreign even to me. Even as I said it, I knew it was lies. I could feel it, the way it held itself above the water without effort, the unnatural stillness that no human could maintain. The river's surface shifted slightly, not a ripple, not a wave, just a distortion, like the world itself was bending around the figure. I took another step back. My flashlight flickered, the beam catching the shape in fleeting glimpses. Too long for me to ignore, too short for me to fully process. The water seemed to wrap around it like fabric, smooth and unbroken. I called out, my voice stronger this time. "I'm a sheriff. I can help you. Just stay still, all right? Don't move." I hated how shaky my own voice sounded. There was no response. Nothing but the fog pressing in closer, muffling the sound of my words almost before they left my mouth. I tried to circle the riverbank to get a better angle, to see if it was maybe caught on something. The mud sucked at my boots, slow and sticky. Every step felt deliberate, like the earth didn't want me here. And every time I looked back, the figure remained exactly where it was, floating, silent, pale. A thought struck me suddenly, sharp and cold. Maybe it wasn't alone. I spun slowly, scanning the fog. The river stretched out of sight in both directions. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, nothing except for that figure. I couldn't shake the feeling that had been waiting for me, that the lights I'd seen last night had led me here. I crouched lower, keeping the beam of the flashlight trained on it. My hand shook. I wanted to throw something into the water, make it react, confirm it was alive. I grabbed a small rock from the bank and lobbed it toward the figure. The rock hit the water, creating a soft splash. The figure didn't move. The water absorbed the noise as if nothing had happened. I froze, breathless. My mind scrambled. There is no explanation. There shouldn't be. And yet, here it was, defying everything I knew about reality. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to call someone else, to tell someone that the river had a ghost or a spirit, something that shouldn't exist. But the rational part of me knew what that would mean. No one would believe it, not without seeing it themselves. I inched closer, slowly, holding the flashlight low now so it wouldn't blind me with a reflection off the water. My boots slipped, mud sucking at them greedily, almost like the river itself was pulling me closer. I felt the chill of the water, cold and penetrating through my pants. The figure didn't flinch, didn't even twitch. It just existed. I reached a point where the water lapped at my knees. I want to call out again to demand an answer, but words failed me. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my feet refused to move backward. I was tethered here by some invisible force, drawn in by curiosity, by fear, by something older and quieter than the river itself. I tried touching the water, reaching toward the figure, but the moment my fingers broke the surface, a shock ran through me. Not electric, not physical, something else. It was as if the river itself had taken notice, and in response, my skin prickled and my vision swam. I jerked my hand back. My heart raced. I stepped back. Finally, the mud giving way under me. I fell into a shallow bank of water, cold and smelly. I lay there for a moment, gasping, chest heaving. The figure hadn't moved. It just floated, pale and silent, the fog wrapping around like a shroud. I scrambled to my feet, shaking, and back toward the bridge. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Every explanation I came up with fell apart under scrutiny. No human could float like that. No human could remain so utterly still. No human could look at you like it did, without expression, without intent, but somehow aware. I called my radio one last time. Dispatch, I need backup. There's something. The static cut me off. Just static. The fog swallowed the signal instantly. I realized then that nothing would help me. No one could see this. No one would believe it. I ran. Back to the car. Back to solid ground. Back to anything familiar. The figure stayed where it was, floating, pale, silent, and impossibly still. I didn't look back, but I felt its presence even as I drove away, even as the fog and the river receded behind me. I could feel it, waiting, watching, tethered to something I didn't understand. And I knew I would come back. I always come back. Because the river doesn't let go. Because the fog doesn't forget. Because the figure is patient. And I am foolish enough to meet its patience with my own. The river never looked the same twice. I know that now. Coming back tonight, the fog had shifted, thicker, slower, like it was breathing with me, pressing at my chest. I parked near the bend, my boots sinking into the damp earth, and squinted across the water. It was calm, deceptively calm, like it hadn't noticed me yet. And then I saw it, a small boat drifting just past the bend. Not anchored, not tied, just floating, swaying with a faint current. It shouldn't have been there. I'd checked this stretch dozens of times in my life. There wasn't supposed to be anything out here, and yet there it was, empty, wooden, weathered, like it had been waiting for someone to notice. My flashlight beam trembled as I swung it over the river. No one inside, no movement, just a quiet creak of wood. The subtle lap of water against the hull. My gut tightened. I wanted to convince myself it was a fisherman, a local taking a late-night ride. But there was no dock nearby, no sound of an engine. Nothing. I took a step closer to the water's edge. My reflection in the black mirror of the river seemed wrong. Stretched, pale, tired. I shook my head. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the fog was playing tricks. I'd seen it do it before, shapes bending, shadows lengthening. But the boat stayed. Solid, real. I squinted through the mist, trying to pick up details. The wood was dark, soaked, glinting faintly under the moonlight. It moved slowly, almost lazily, but there was a purpose to it, a quiet inevitability. And then I noticed it, just for a second, something, or someone might have been sitting in the stern. My breath caught. My hand shook. I couldn't tell if it was a fog, my imagination, or something else. I leaned forward, gripping the muddy bank, trying to steady myself. Hello. My voice sounded weak, swallowed immediately by the fog. No reply, just the river, rolling slowly under the boat. The air was thick, heavy, almost wet with anticipation. I thought about calling it in, about radioing dispatch, but the memory of last night kept me from doing it. No one would believe me. Not now. Not if I said a boat drifted into view and seemed alive. They'd chalk it up to stress, fatigue, too many late-night calls. Maybe they'd be right. Maybe I was losing it. I took another step, then froze. The boat had moved closer. Not a lot, maybe a few feet, but the current shouldn't have done that. There was no wind. No one was rowing. And yet, it shifted toward me, slowly, deliberately, like it knew I was watching. I swallowed hard. My chest tightened. The rational part of me screamed to leave, to back away, to run. But the other part, the part that had come back again, despite everything, kept me rooted in place. I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop. Then it happened. The boat vanished. I blinked. One moment it was there, drifting like some ghostly relic, and the next, the water was empty, smooth, black, silent. My heart thudded in my ears. I spun around, convinced I'd misjudged the angle, that the fog had played a trick, that somehow I'd imagined it, but the air, the cold press of fog against my skin, told me I hadn't. I stepped forward, reaching toward where it had been. My hand sliced through nothing, just cold, still water. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I'd seen. Boats don't vanish. Not like that. Not in a river. I know as well as the lines on my own palms. Yet my eyes insisted there had been something, and now it was gone. I called out again, louder this time. "Hey, who's there?" My voice cracked, uneven, swallowed immediately by the dense fog. Silence answered, only the distant, soft hum of the river. My stomach churned. Doubt crept in, insidious and sharp. Had I really seen it? Or was it my mind breaking under the weight of last night? The figure in the water, the endless fog pressing at my skin? I tried to steady myself, gripping my flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. I scanned the river, left to right, expecting, hoping, dreading the boat to reappear. And for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow at the far bend. I blinked. Nothing. The fog shifted again, curling around me like a living thing, thickening until the world beyond 10 feet seemed to dissolve. I could barely see the riverbank, barely see my own reflection in the black water. My breath came out in sharp bursts. The doubt, the fear, the memory of the pale figure from last night. It all mingled, pressing into my mind like ice water. I stepped closer to the river's edge, boots sinking into mud. The cold seeped through my jeans, biting at my skin. I had to know. I had to see. My hand shook as I reached forward, slicing the surface with the flashlight. Water lapped silently. Empty. Smooth. Clean. No boat. No shadow. Nothing. I backed up, heart hammering. The rational part of me wanted to leave, to drive back to town and forget the stretch of river existed. The other part, the part that had stared into the motionless figure last night, wanted to push forward, wanted to chase what vanished into nothing. I didn't understand it, but I knew I'd feel this tug until I returned. Then a sound, faint at first, almost nothing, a soft creak, like with straining underweight. My flashlight snapped toward the source, and for a heartbeat, the boat was there, not floating this time, not drifting, almost hovering above the water, like it had no business being in a river at all. And still it was empty. I froze. The fog swirled around me, cold and thick, hiding the river's surface in wavering veils. I tried to move, to step closer, but my feet felt heavier, anchored. It was as if the river itself had taken hold of me. I swallowed, gagging back panic. Tried to remind myself it was just fog, just a trick. The boat didn't move. It didn't rock. It just existed. Palpable, solid, impossible. And yet, when I blinked, it was gone again. One instant there, the next, nothing. My pulse thundered. I rubbed my eyes. I breathed. I checked the river's edge. Mud, water, nothing but fog. Doubt crept in like a shadow curling around my mind. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the fog had warped the light, the reflection, my own fatigue twisting reality into something unrecognizable. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe all of this, last night, the lights, the figure, the boat, was unraveling my sanity. I shook my head. No, I know what I saw. The boat existed. I saw it with my own eyes. Felt the air shift when it was there. Felt the pull, the subtle tug of something not human in its presence. I know, and yet the emptiness where it should be now makes me question everything. I tried calling it in, hoping someone else would confirm it. even if just to quiet my own racing mind. Dispatch. I see a boat, a small, static, nothing but static. The fog swallowed the signal as easily as it swallowed the river. I stepped forward again, boots sinking into mud, heart hammering, flashlight slicing through the fog. My mind screamed at me to stop, to retreat, to return to what was familiar and safe. But my body moved anyway, drawn to the impossible, tethered to something I didn't understand. And then a subtle movement, a faint shimmer, a distortion along the river's surface. The boat, or something like it, reappeared at the far bend. I froze, my eyes strained through the mist, empty, silent, and yet my gut told me it was aware, waiting, watching. I wanted to throw something into the water, to provoke a reaction, but the thought of touching it, of breaking the illusion, made my hands tremble. I wanted to run, to leave, to convince myself it was all in my head. But even as I considered retreat, I knew I wouldn't leave. Not yet. Not while the river still held secrets. Not while the fog still whispered. The boat drifted closer, slow, deliberate, not guided by wind or current, not tied to anything. It moved as if it had a mind of its own, a purpose beyond comprehension. I tried to blink, to adjust my perception, but the more I looked, the more impossible it became. And then it vanished again. I stumbled back, tripping over mud and roots, heart pounding, breath ragged. My flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of empty water, the black river, and nothing more. I leaned against a tree, pressed my palms to my knees, and swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I don't understand it. I can't. And yet I know what I saw. The boat existed. It moved. It vanished. And through all of it, the fog lingered, thick and alive, curling around me, whispering doubts I don't want to hear. I backed toward my car slowly, eyes never leaving the river, chest tight, muscles tense. The river seemed calm now, indifferent, but the memory of the boat, of its impossible presence, pressed on me like a living thing. Even as I drove away, even as the town lights appeared, I could feel it, watching, waiting, patient. And I knew one way or another I'd return. I always do. I thought coming home would help. I thought leaving the river behind, leaving the fog, the lights, the boat, the figure, would settle me, make me breathe easier. But home isn't what it used to be. Not tonight. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Too quiet, too still. I flicked on the porch light, and the bulbs buzzed weakly, casting pale circles on the floorboards. Inside, the air smelled faintly damp, as if the fog had followed me, curling under the door and through the cracks of the windows. I shook my head. It's just a smell. It's just the house settling. Stop it. I tried to settle, tried to tell myself that what I'd seen was out there, not here. The river was far enough away now, the town streets separating me from whatever waited in the fog. And yet, every shadow in my living room seemed wrong, longer than it should be, too dark at the edges, stretching just past corners it had no business reaching. I moved through the kitchen slowly, boots scraping against the worn floorboards. The kettle whined as I sat on the stove, water rattling against metal. I glanced at the living room. For a split second, I could have sworn the shadow by the doorway moved. A flicker, subtle, impossible to pin down. My chest tightened. I swallowed, trying to ground myself. It's just nerves. It's just fatigue. You've been staring at the river all night. I poured water into the kettle, hands trembling despite my best effort to steady them. Steam hissed as the burner caught. And still, I noticed the shadows. They didn't belong. Behind the sofa, one stretched taller than the ceiling, curling around the edges like smoke. By the window, another lingered. Even though the blinds were closed, the streetlights too far to cast such shapes. My eyes darted around, looking for the source, but found nothing. No one. No lamp left on. Just a fog of my own imagination, creeping into the house. Or maybe not just my imagination. I tried to sit, tried to tell myself to breathe, to relax. I told myself that the river was gone, that the boat and the pale figure were out there, not here. And yet, every time I closed my eyes for a moment, I saw them, The still water, the fog curling, the impossible drift of that small boat. I rubbed my face and went to the kitchen sink. The water ran clear, steady, normal. My reflection in the faucet stared back at me, pale and hollow. I forced a laugh, bitter and uneven. I look like hell. You look like hell. It's just the night. It's just the river. I tried to shake it off. Try to focus on something mundane. I made a cup of coffee, bitter and strong. The aroma filled the kitchen. But even that couldn't mask the sense of presence I felt, the subtle tug at the edges of my mind. I sat at the table, gripping the mug, staring at the foggy glass window. The street outside was quiet, empty, unremarkable. And yet, I could swear I saw movement. Shadows flicking along the far edges of vision, shifting as if they had a will of their own. I told myself it was exhaustion, overthinking, the strain of the last few nights. But a part of me, a deeper, colder part, knew the river hadn't stayed in its place. It had followed me. The shadows didn't behave like shadows. They lingered. They waited, stretching just beyond the reach of light, curling over corners, hiding in the folds of the room. And I could feel them in my chest, pressing against my ribs, tracing the line of my spine. I got up, pacing, trying to banish the feeling, trying to remind myself of reality. The fog out there, the river, the drifting boat, it was out there. It couldn't touch me here. And yet, the longer I walked, the more I noticed them. How one stretched across the hallway like a living thing. How another seemed to gather by the staircase, growing taller when I looked directly at it, shrinking when I turned away. I pinched my eyes shut. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. But it didn't leave. I moved to the living room, slamming the lamp on, casting bright light across every wall. The shadows shrank instantly, receding like animals disturbed but not gone. Not gone. Something lingered in the corners of my vision, beyond the edges of the lamplight. Something watching, patient, waiting. I sank onto the sofa, gripping my knees, trying to convince myself to calm down. I told myself it was a river, that the fog, the boat, the figure, it was all out there, but the memory of those nights, the emptiness of the water, the impossible drift of the small boat, clung to my mind like a stain I couldn't scrub away. I tried to think of something else. Work, the dispatcher, the town, the river, yes, but as a place, not as whatever it had become. My thoughts slipped, inevitably, to the pale figure, motionless in the water, empty eyes, silent presence. I could see it clearly in my mind's eye, the fog curling around it, the boat drifting just beyond reach. I shivered. The shadows in the room moved again. I could feel it this time more than see it, a pressure in the corner of the ceiling, a subtle weight on the floorboards. The air seemed heavier, denser. I tried calling out to speak to it, but my voice caught in my throat. I grabbed the flashlight I had left on the counter. The beam cut a sharp line through the foggy edges of the living room. Every corner, every shadow was plain now, ordinary, but the feeling didn't leave. The air hummed faintly, a vibration under my skin, a subtle pull toward the river I couldn't shake. I wandered through the house, flashlight sweeping, room by room, bedroom, bathroom, hallway, every space ordinary, normal. Yet the fog in my mind thickened, curling around memories I didn't want, pulling the river into my home, dragging the drift of the boat into corners of rooms, behind doors, under tables. I sat at the window again, coffee forgotten, flashlight off, staring out at the street. The fog outside was thin now, almost nothing, but in my mind it swirled, thick, alive, pressing against my chest. The river haunted me still. The boat haunted me still. The figure haunted me still. And now, so did the shadows. I leaned back, trying to breathe, trying to focus. The rational part of me fought to assert control, to remind myself that shadows on walls, the stretch of light from street lamps, the play of moonlight through curtains. These are things that happen, ordinary, harmless, but the irrational part, the part that had seen the river drift into impossibility, the pale figure floating silently, the small boat that vanished knew better. The shadows weren't harmless. Not here, not anywhere. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, and I realized the shadows were moving again, slow, deliberate, curling along the walls, gathering by the staircase. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination. It's just your mind. You've been out there too long. You're tired. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. The weight in my chest didn't lessen. It pressed down, insistent. The fog of the river was here, inside my skull, inside my lungs. I could hear the distant lap of water against some unseen hull, the faint creak of the boat drifting somewhere in the dark, the soft brush of pale skin against black water. I opened my eyes. The shadows were gone. Or maybe I was just too tired to see them clearly. Maybe I wanted to believe I was alone. But the pressure didn't leave. The weight in my chest, the tug at my mind, the impossible pull toward the river. It was still there, lurking, patient, waiting. I sank into the sofa, wrapping my arms around my legs. I tried to convince myself I was safe, that the river was far away, that the house was solid, that the lights, the figure, the boat, the shadows, they were all separate things. But I knew it wasn't true. They were connected, and I had followed them home, unwilling, curious, foolish. The fog pressed at the windows, subtle, almost unnoticeable. But I felt it, cold, damp, patient. The river had followed me. The drift of the boat had followed me. And now the shadows lingered, not cast by light, not bound by shape, not anchored in reality, but real enough to make my skin crawl, to press against my chest, to reach into my thoughts and curl around the edges of my sanity. I didn't sleep that night. Every corner of the house seemed alive, every shadow moving just beyond my peripheral vision. The river haunted me in dreams and memories in the spaces between breaths. I could feel the small boat drifting, the figure floating, the fog curling. I could feel the weight of all of it pressing against me. Patient, waiting. I realized, finally, with a cold certainty, that home was no longer a sanctuary. I could lock the doors, switch on lights, watch the fog dissipate outside. But the river, the boat, the figure, the shadows, they were here in my mind, in my chest, in the quiet, in the pause between heartbeats. I am not safe. Not yet. Not ever. As long as the river exists, as long as the fog lingers, as long as the shadows wait in corners I can't see. And I know I will return. I always do. I remember the first call coming in just past midnight. The phone on the dispatch desk had that sharp, almost angry ring, the kind that makes your stomach knot before you even pick it up. I glanced at the clock, 12:07 a.m., and rubbed my eyes. Normally, these calls are nothing. A stranded driver, maybe some kids playing pranks down by the old mill road. But this one, it had a weight to it I couldn't shake. Sheriff, you need to come. There's someone, or something, at the crossroads, the voice said. I froze for a second. The words tumbled out in a rush, broken, like the call was afraid to finish them. It's, look, there's figures. People, maybe, but not quite. There. The line went dead before they could finish. I sat there, the receiver still warm in my hand, feeling that slow, gnawing tension creep up my spine. I know the road near the crossroads well. Everyone does in this county. Old, worn asphalt stretching into thick woods, where the shadows fall heavier than they should. It's quiet out there at night. Too quiet. You don't hear much but the wind, the leaves, and maybe the distant bark of a dog. By the time I hung up, the dispatch phone was already lighting up again. Another call. Same thing. Someone screaming about figures at the crossroads. Different voices. The same terror. I ran the names. None of them seemed related. Strangers. People just passing through, or locals too shaken to form sentences. I grabbed my coat, keys, and flashlight, muttering to myself. Figures. Figures, huh? The word didn't sit right. Normally, a call like this, I'd wait for backup, maybe drive out with a deputy. But tonight, there was something about it. The urgency in those voices, the way they stopped talking, like looking at would make it come closer. I couldn't wait. The cruiser's engine hummed to life. Lights off, silent. The kind of darkness that makes the countryside seem endless. I drove slow, hands gripping the wheel, listening to the crunch of gravel on the side roads. Every turn brought that hollow feeling, The one where the air feels thicker, the night colder than it should be. By the time I reached the crossroads, the headlights barely touched the edges of the road. Trees leaned over like they were watching, shadows stretching across the asphalt like dark fingers. I stepped out, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the fog that had rolled in quietly, almost naturally, as if the night itself had decided to thicken. Nothing. I waited, my ears strained for the tiniest sound. Branches snapping, leaves rustling. But all I heard was a distant hum of insects and the occasional croak of a frog. And then I thought I saw it. A movement, a figure, or maybe several, just past the tree line. I called out, keeping my voice steady. "Sheriff here. Who's out there?" No response. Only the night breathing around me. I moved forward slowly, flashlight cutting through the fog. The beam hit something or someone, but it didn't respond. Didn't even seem to notice me. My stomach churned. Its shape was human enough at first glance, but there was something wrong. The angles of the body, the way it lingered in the shadows, seemed unnatural, almost exaggerated, like a reflection in a warped mirror. I froze. Then a sound, low, almost a whisper carried by the wind. It was gone before I could be sure I heard it, but my pulse jumped. I glanced around. Nothing, just the empty road and the trees, leaning closer like they were alive. I tried the radio. "Dispatch! This is Sheriff at the crossroads. I see nothing. Over. Static. Dispatch? Come in." Still static. I gritted my teeth. Not unusual, but tonight it felt deliberate, like the woods themselves were swallowing the sound, keeping it from going anywhere. Another movement closer this time. And then, I swear, one of the figures stepped into the light of my flashlight. Just for a second. A pale face. Hollow eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. I spun the beam around, my heart hammering. Nothing. I told myself it was a trick of the light. A deer maybe, or some poor lost traveler. But the feeling in my chest said otherwise. Something was here. Something that didn't belong. I called out again, louder this time. "Hey, Sheriff here. You need help? Come out." Silence, except for the wind and the low rustle of leaves. And then the calls came in again, one after another. Static, screams, fragmented words. People screaming about the same figures, the same shapes. "They're staring," one voice shrieked. "Don't look at them," another said. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, breathing hard. The lights of my cruiser painted the fog in harsh white lines, cutting the darkness into chunks I could almost understand. Almost. The last call came from a number I didn't recognize. A woman, shaky, whispering, "Don't, they'll see you, they'll..." And then nothing. Dead air. I looked out the windshield, scanning the fog with a sudden clarity. The road ahead, the trees, the empty fields, all seemed different. Wrong. The horizon, if you could call it that, was jagged. Shadows shifted where they shouldn't. And that feeling, the one that started in my stomach, was growing, like the night itself was pressing closer, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I thought about waiting for backup. I thought about calling it in, driving back to the station, pretending it was nothing but a string of overactive imaginations. But that instinct, the one you get after years on the job, the one that keeps you alive, told me not to, not tonight, not here. I grabbed my flashlight again, stepping out onto the gravel. Every crunch underfoot sounded deafening. I tried to control my breathing, tried to keep my hands from shaking. The wind carried faint whispers. I couldn't tell if it was the trees, the fog, or something else. Then I saw them, just past the curve of the road. 3 figures. They didn't move like humans. They swayed, jerked slightly, as if caught between this world and another. Shadows stretched in their forms, long and thin, stretching toward me like fingers. I wanted to turn and run. Every instinct screamed at me to get in the cruiser and drive until the lights of town swallowed me whole. But my body didn't move. I couldn't. I raised my flashlight slowly. The beam cut through the fog, landing on one of them. Its face, if you could call it that, was pale, almost translucent, eyes black holes reflecting nothing, yet somehow seeing everything. My stomach dropped. I stumbled back, tripping over gravel, and the beam wavered. They didn't advance. They didn't retreat. They just watched. And then the whispers, louder now, more insistent. Voices overlapping. Calling my name, though I knew I hadn't spoken it. Calling me closer. Pulling me in. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the road, spinning the beam in circles. The figures shifted, moving in tandem with the light, like predators dancing in the spotlight. I scrambled, grabbed the flashlight, and backed toward my cruiser. The calls were still coming in, non-stop, static-laced, panicked. I realized none of them knew each other. None of them could see each other. And yet, they were all calling about the same things. The same figures. The same road. My hand shook as I started the cruiser, slamming the door shut. I needed to get somewhere safe. Anywhere. But the engine sputtered, coughed, then died. I was stuck. Alone. And the night was moving closer. The fog curling around the edges of the headlights like fingers reaching for me. I didn't wait. I climbed out again, heart hammering, eyes darting. The figures were closer. Not running, not walking, just there, watching, waiting. And I knew, with a certainty that made my blood ice, that the night had changed. That something in the darkness wasn't going to let me leave. I radioed one last time. Dispatch, it's bad. Really bad. Don't come out here. Don't. Static. Silence. I gripped my flashlight, the weight of it almost comforting. I had no plan, no backup. Just the road, the fog, and the figures waiting, patient, deliberate. And I knew that by the time dawn came, nothing would be the same. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The night had grown heavier since the last call. Fog thickening, curling around the road like smoke from some unseen fire. My cruiser sat idling at the crossroads, engine humming low, tires crunching on the gravel. Every instinct I had screamed that this wasn't just another call. It was something else. And then I saw it, a figure, black, standing perfectly still at the edge of the road. Not walking, not moving, just there, the fog part around it, but only enough to reveal the outline. I squinted, heart tightening. I've been on this job long enough to know shapes in the dark. Shadows play tricks. Trees look like men. But this wasn't a trick. It was wearing black, from head to toe. No features I could make out. No face, no hands, no hint of skin. Just a silhouette that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, leaving a patch of darkness where it stood. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the cold sweat on my palms. My voice, when it came out, sounded brittle even to my own ears. Who's there? I called. My words carried over the stillness, bouncing off the trees, swallowed by the fog. Nothing. I told myself it was just a drifter. Someone spooked by the stories of the crossroads. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Something about the way it stood, perfectly still, defied reason. No human could hold themselves like that, rigid, without a twitch, a breath, a sound. I stepped out, flashlight in hand. The beam barely reached it, and the closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like walking through water, like the night itself had pressed down on me, and every step forward was a struggle. "Hey, I'm the sheriff," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my chest felt like it was being crushed. "Are you lost?" Still nothing, just a figure, unmoving. I wanted to run back to the cruiser. My fingers itched for my radio, for some lifeline, but something, fear, curiosity, stubbornness, kept me rooted. I had to see it. I had to know what it was. As I took a step closer, my stomach churned violently. A visceral dread I hadn't felt since the old Miller farm fire gripped me. Not just fear, but a deep, bone-level panic. My skin prickled, my chest tightened, my vision narrowed, focusing only on that figure. Every other sound, every other movement, faded into an echo of nothingness. It felt alive, not in a human sense, but alive in the way shadows are alive in dreams. Watching me, waiting, patient, silent. I called out again. Do you need help?" My voice broke on the last word, a tremor running through it. The figure didn't move, but then, slowly, impossibly, it tilted its head. Just a fraction. And that was enough. My stomach dropped. My legs felt like they were sinking into the road. My throat went dry. The fear hit me like a physical blow. My mind screamed to turn and run, but my feet betrayed me. I stepped closer. The fog swirled around the figure, tendrils curling like smoke, twisting in ways that seemed unnatural. And then I realized something. The air around it smelled wrong. Not like decay, not like rot, just wrong. Like metal left out in the rain too long. Like the tang of static electricity on your skin. I swallowed, forcing myself to speak. Look, I can help you. My words cut off as the figure took a single step forward. I didn't hear it. It made no sound. But I felt it in the pit of my stomach. A cold pressure that made my knees weak. The night seemed to respond. The fog thickened. The trees creaked. The darkness pressed in. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The beam wavered, catching on its black form again. And I noticed it. The edges, not sharp, not defined. As if the figure was bleeding into the shadows, merging with the fog, growing taller, stretching upward in ways that defied perspective. My pulse thundered in my ears. I told myself I was imagining it, that my mind was playing tricks after the calls, after the night, after everything. But I knew better. I knew the truth in the bones of my body. This wasn't imagination. This was something else. Something that didn't belong. I tried the radio again. Dispatch, it's static, not the usual crackle, not the kind you get from distance. This was deeper, louder, oppressive, like the darkness itself was speaking through it, drowning out my voice. I slammed the transmitter down, heart hammering. The figure moved again. Another step, no sound, and I realized I had stopped breathing, not intentionally. My lungs had locked up, and I was counting on the shallow, pulled air to keep me alive. I took another step back, then another. My flashlight flickered, just for a moment. When it came back, the figure was closer, closer. The dread in me spiked, overwhelming everything else. I wanted to turn and run, but it felt like the crossroads had changed, stretched, warped around me. The road was longer, the trees closer, the fog thicker. My brain struggled to process it. It was still the same crossroads. I knew that, but it wasn't. Not really. I could feel it now, watching, judging, waiting. I didn't just see the figure. I felt it, in my chest, behind my eyes, in my bones, and that fear, that pure visceral terror, wrapped around me like chains. I whispered, almost to myself, "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. It didn't need to. Its presence was answer enough. I tried to think of something rational. Maybe a prankster in black. Maybe a local drunk. Maybe shadows and fog and my own imagination. But every rational thought collided with the fear in my chest, splintering into pieces. Nothing fit. Nothing explained the weight of it, the stillness, the intent in that silence. And I noticed the ground. Small marks. Faint at first, like footprints. Not human. Too elongated. Too stretched. They disappeared into the fog, leading directly toward me. And with each step I took back, it seemed those marks multiplied, circling, closing in. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. The beam wavered over the black figure, catching just enough to remind me it was there, that it hadn't moved anywhere but closer, that the shadows were alive, curling into its form. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to call for help. But I couldn't. Not yet. Something deep inside me, the part that survived long nights, abandoned houses, car wrecks, and fires, knew I wasn't ready to face this. And yet I couldn't turn away. I couldn't. I swallowed hard. Every instinct was screaming at me. Every nerve ending burned. And then, impossibly, I stepped forward. Just one step. And the air around me tightened, squeezing my lungs. I could hear nothing but the blood in my ears. Could feel the pulse in my temples. Could sense the heartbeat of the night itself responding to me. The figure tilted its head again. Just slightly. And that was all it took. I froze. The cold, creeping dread settled deep into my bones. I wanted to run. My mind screamed at me to run. But my feet remained planted. I realized then that it didn't need to move to terrify me. It didn't need to make a sound. The mere fact of its presence, the perfection of its silence, was enough. Enough to warp the world, to make the fog heavier, the road longer, the night darker. And I understood something then, something primal. This wasn't a human. This wasn't a person. It wasn't even a thing in the normal sense. It was something else. Something that belonged to the crossroads, to the night, to the fog. And it wanted me to know it was there, to feel it, to fear it. I stumbled back again, nearly falling. The flashlight rolled, spinning the beam wildly, catching glimpses of its black form as it seemed to grow, stretching, almost pulsing in the fog. I could feel my sanity fraying, the edges of my mind pulling against the dark. I wanted to run, to call for help, to escape. But I was rooted, frozen, watching. And then I heard it. Not a sound, not a voice, not anything I could define. Just a feeling, a presence, deep and cold, sinking into me, pressing into me, following me. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air, praying it wasn't real, begging myself to wake up. But the fog, the darkness, the figure in black, it was all real. And I knew that whatever I did next, whatever choice I made, I wasn't leaving that crossroads unchanged. Because once you felt it, once you've seen it, the figure in black never leaves. I drove slowly, headlights barely piercing the fog that still clung to the crossroads. The figure in black had vanished, or maybe I blinked and it had never moved. Either way, the fear clung to me like a second skin. My hands gripped the wheel, so tight I thought I might leave impressions in the leather. Then I saw them, lights, small, flickering, floating above the fields to my left. At first, I thought it might be farm machinery, a tractor maybe, or some distant headlights. But the pattern was wrong. They weren't moving like machines. They weren't stationary like lanterns hung from fence posts. They twisted, shifted, hovered. Shapes formed, then dissolved, only to reform somewhere else entirely. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced it was fatigue, the stress of night, the lingering dread from crossroads. I told myself it had to be rational. Everything in my life had always been rational. Calls, emergencies, accidents, they all made sense. This didn't. I parked at the edge of the road, heart pounding, and stepped out. The air was cold, sharper than the night should have allowed, and the fog pressed against my coat like wet fingers. The lights danced in the fields, bright enough to cast shadows, yet impossibly ephemeral. I called out, "Hello? Anybody there?" My voice sounded absurdly loud, even in my own ears. No answer, just a flickering, shifting lights, moving in patterns that almost felt deliberate, almost like they were trying to communicate. I stepped closer to the field's edge. Gravel crunched underfoot. The fog twisted around me, hiding the shapes, then revealing them again. The lights formed circles, jagged lines, something resembling a grid, but nothing I could define. I took another step, and the shapes shifted. It wasn't random. They were responding to me. A laugh bubbled up in my chest, half disbelief, half fear. "This isn't real," I muttered. "This can't be real." But every instinct, every nerve ending, told me otherwise. My stomach churned. My throat dried. I felt the old, gnawing dread crawling up my spine. I thought about turning back to the crossroads, back to my cruiser, back to anything familiar. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted, as though the night itself had wrapped around my legs. I forced another step, and the lights pulsed, almost in sync with my heartbeat. Rational thought began to fracture. I tried to make sense of it. Reflections of distant houses? Fireflies? Some local prank? None of it fit. None of it made sense. The patterns, the timing, the shapes, they were too perfect, too deliberate. The world felt unhinged, as though I had stepped into a place where logic no longer applied. I raised my flashlight, trying to cut through the fog, to find some anchor in reality. The beam swung across the fields. The lights twisted into a shape I couldn't describe, but I knew immediately that it wasn't natural. A human brain could not have designed it. I felt a pang in my chest, a visceral fear that made my skin crawl and my teeth ache. Then the lights went out, all of them at once. Darkness swallowed the field. My flashlight shook in my hands as I tried to pierce the void. For a moment, the only thing I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the wind. And then they returned. Not in the same pattern, not in the same place. They moved faster now, slicing to the fog, weaving intricate forms that my mind couldn't hold on to. Circles inside circles, spirals that seemed to spin forever, shapes that shifted as though watching me, observing me, judging me. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the uneven ground. I gripped my flashlight tighter, desperately trying to find familiar, but the world felt unreal. The field had grown larger, stretched in impossible ways. The fog thickened, curling around the lights, around me, around everything. I whispered to myself, trying to anchor reality. I'm the sheriff. I've seen things. I know what's real. But even as I said it, the lights formed shapes that mocked that thought. They were here and I was not in control. My mind began to fray. Rational explanations slipped further away. The cold pressed harder now, seeping into my bones. My hands shook. I thought I saw movement within the lights. Figures almost human, but not human. Just shadows, elongated, distorted, hovering in tandem with the flickering shapes. My chest constricted, and I realized I had been holding my breath. I wanted to run. I wanted to call for help. I wanted anything but this. But my feet remained planted, rooted in place. The shapes, the patterns, the unnatural geometry. They called to something inside me, something ancient, something I had buried deep when I was a kid, when I first learned the world had corners no light could reach. Memories flashed unbidden. The Miller farm fire, the boy lost in the woods, the abandoned church with broken windows. All of it seemed to echo in the patterns before me, the shifting, flickering lights. My rational mind tried to separate them, tried to breathe logic into the chaos. But the lights ignored logic. They bent it, folded it, made it irrelevant. I stepped forward again. A step, then another. The lights pulsed in response, brightening, dimming, forming jagged lines that cut across the field like wounds in the night. I felt a tightening in my chest, a fear that wasn't just psychological, it was physical. My stomach turned. My knees shook. My hands were slick with cold sweat. Then a new pattern emerged. Not circles or lines, but something that resembled a figure, a silhouette standing among the lights. Black, impossibly still, impossibly tall. And my heart froze. I knew that figure. I had seen it at the crossroads. It didn't move. It didn't blink. But its presence pressed down on me, made my lungs ache, made my thoughts scatter. I stumbled back, eyes wide, mouth dry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call for backup. I wanted to flee. But even in the panic, I couldn't look away. The lights swirled around it now, forming impossible geometries. Shapes I couldn't name. Triangles within circles, spirals inside squares. Forms that seemed alive, almost sentient. And I realized that my mind could not hold on to them. Rationality began to slip. My memories, my logic, my understanding of the world. They all began to dissolve under the weight of the flickering lights. I fell to my knees, clutching the flashlight as if it could anchor me to something real. The figure watched. The lights moved around me, folding the world into patterns I could not comprehend. My vision blurred. My thoughts splintered. My fear became a living thing, crawling over my skin, coiling around my ribs, squeezing my chest. I whispered, a broken sound. This isn't real. It can't be real. But the shapes shifted, forming a lattice, a cage, a prison of light. My own voice echoed back at me, warped, distorted, a mockery of sanity. I tried to rise, tried to move toward the figure, toward some understanding, but the field seemed endless. The fog had thickened to a curtain. My legs sank into the damp ground. The lights pulsed faster, forming patterns that seemed to stretch forever, looping, twisting, expanding into the distance. I remembered my training, my experience, every night on the job, every time I had faced fear. But none of that prepared me for this. None of it could. The crossroads, the figure in black, the shifting lights. It was all beyond reason, beyond comprehension. and my mind, my body, my very sense of being began a fray under it. The figure in black remained, silent, watching, and the lights danced, forming impossible shapes across the fields. I realized then that the night itself had changed. The world itself had shifted. I wasn't standing in the same world I had known. I was somewhere else, somewhere unhinged, somewhere that did not obey logic, time, or physics. I pressed the flashlight to my eyes, shaking. The beams cut through the fog, catching glimpses of the patterns, the shapes, the figure. And I understood, in that awful, visceral way, that rationality had left me, that the world I had known, the one I had clung to, had slipped through my fingers, and I had no choice but to keep moving forward, toward the lights, toward the figure, toward whatever truth lay beyond the flickering shapes in the fields. Because standing still meant being consumed. I ran without thinking. One moment I was at the edge of the fields, staring at the shifting lights, the figure in black, and the next, my feet were carrying me into the corn. Wet, cold mud sucked at my boots, pulling me down with every desperate step. The stalks pressed in from all sides, leaves slicing against my arms and face. I couldn't see the sky, couldn't see the road, just darkness, fog, and the endless, rustling sea of corn. I stumbled, almost face first, my hands gripping the muddy earth, tasting iron and wetness. I forced myself upright and ran again, heart hammering, lungs burning. Every instinct screamed to flee. Every rational thought, every training I'd ever had, shouted for caution. But reason had no place here. Reason didn't belong in the night that had stretched its black hands across the crossroads, the fields, and now me. I thought I could hear behind me. Not footsteps, no sound, but something following, a presence. I knew it was there without needing to see it. The figure, the black shape from the crossroads. It didn't make a sound. It didn't need to. It moved with the fog, with the shadows, with the night itself. I felt it in my chest, a pressure that made my ribs ache. I turned sharply, spinning through the corn, trying to catch a glimpse of it, trying to convince myself it wasn't there. But nothing, only stalks waving in the wind, only the mud sucking at my boots, only the low hum of my own heartbeat, and the ragged rasp of my breathing. I shouted, my voice breaking, "Stop, I can see you." No answer. Of course there was none. The world had changed. This wasn't just a chase. It was a test, or a trap, something older than me, older than the land, older than sense itself. I tried to run straight, but the cornfields were endless. Every step forward seemed to bring me back to the same spot. Every twist in the stalks bringing a new wall, a new barrier, another corner where the fog clung tighter, colder. I felt dizzy. My stomach lurched. My legs burned, and still the presence followed, patient, silent, relentless. The mud thickened. It filled my boots, weighing them down. I slipped. My hands went into the wet ground. I groaned, tasting the earth again, forcing myself upright. My coat was soaked, clinging to me. The fog swirled, thickening around the stalks, hiding everything. I couldn't see anything more than a few feet ahead, and yet I could feel it, watching, waiting, gliding behind me, closer. I thought of the crossroads, the figure in black, the flickering lights in the distant fields. Every memory of the night before pressed against my mind like hands trying to push me under. I'd seen things, heard things, felt things, things that didn't make sense, things that weren't human. And now, I was running through a living maze, and the world itself had turned against me. A rustle to my left made me spin. My flashlight, still in hand, flickered weakly, casting thin beams through the stalks. Nothing, just the mud, the corn, the fog. But the feeling was stronger now. It wasn't just following, it was closing in. Every instinct screamed at me to move faster. I tried. I ran blindly, slipping, sliding, the mud sucking, the corn snapping against my skin. I could hear the whispers, or thought I did, soft, almost inaudible, brushing against my ears like the wind, like leaves, like voices calling from somewhere just beyond perception. "You can't leave," they said. I didn't want to believe it, but the words stuck in my chest. I swallowed hard, tasting bile. My mind began to fragment. Time became meaningless. I couldn't tell if I had been running for minutes or hours. Every turn in the cornfield looked the same. Every shadow seemed alive. My flashlight flickered again, catching glimpses of something black, moving impossibly fast between stalks. Or maybe I imagined it. Maybe fear had finally taken over. I slipped again, mud coating my hands, streaking my face. I pulled myself upright, gasping for air, trying to shake the growing panic that threatened to consume me. I could feel it now, right behind me. Not just a presence, not just a shadow. A weight, a pressure that pressed against my back, my shoulders, my mind. Every step forward became a struggle, a battle against the invisible pull dragging me back. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted anything but this. But the cornfield seemed endless, stretching into some twisted infinity where logic could not reach. I felt disoriented. My feet moved on their own, turning, weaving, slipping, and yet the path never seemed to take me anywhere. I remembered the crossroads, the black figure, the flickering lights, and I realized something awful. Wherever I went, whatever I did, it was always one step behind. Patient, waiting. I couldn't outpace it. I couldn't see it. And yet I knew. I stumbled into a low patch of ground. Mud splashed over my boots, over my hands. I tasted it again, iron and wet decay. My chest heaved, my lungs burned. I could hear nothing but the slap of mud against boots, my ragged breathing, and something else. A low hum, almost imperceptible, but it vibrated in my chest and my bones as though the field itself was alive, pulsing, breathing with me. I shouted, a desperate sound that tore through the fog. Show yourself. Nothing, only the rustle of the corn, whispering, bending in ways that made no sense. Shapes flickered in the corners of my eyes, shadows too dark for the night. And then, for the first time, I saw it, the figure, black as midnight, impossibly still, watching, waiting, not moving, but somehow closer than it had been. My gut screamed at me. My legs threatened to buckle. My chest constricted. And I realized, in a moment of clarity that terrified me more than the sight itself, that it had never been behind me. It had been ahead. It had been leading me. I stumbled forward, trying to force my mind to make sense. The cornfield twisted around me. Every turn brought the same shapes, the same stalks, the same fog. I couldn't tell left from right. Forward was meaningless. And through it all, the black figure stood, waiting, patient, eternal. I fell to my hands and knees in the mud, shoving myself forward. My flashlight beam shook, catching glimpses of stalks, glimpses of shadows, glimpses of the figure. My hands were cut, scraped, coated in mud. My face burned with cold and panic. I tasted fear itself, metallic and bitter, dripping down my throat. I tried to call out again, but the sound caught in my throat. My voice sounded wrong in the fog, swallowed, distorted. The world itself seemed to warp around me. The cornfield stretched, twisted, looped back on itself. Shapes appeared in the fog. Shapes too dark, too perfect to be natural. And I realized my mind could no longer process it. Rational thought failed. Logic dissolved. I forced myself up, trembling, eyes scanning the stalks. The figure moved now, impossibly fast, slipping through the corn without a sound. It didn't chase. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. The weight, the pressure, the dread. It pulled at me, wrapped around me, made every breath a struggle. Mud clung to my boots. Leaves tore at my coat. My hands shook. And still, I pressed forward, following the twisted path the field seemed to create, drawn by some fear I couldn't name, some compulsion I couldn't resist. I remembered every moment that had brought me here. The calls, the crossroads, the flickering lights, the figure in black. Every memory was a thread leading to this place. Every experience a tether anchoring me to a reality I no longer understood. I stumbled, fell again, tasted mud, tasted fear. And then, through a fog, I thought I saw it. A clearing, maybe, or a shift in the field. Something open, bright, impossibly calm. My chest heaved. My legs burned. My mind wavered. And I knew, with a certainty that made my blood ice, that whatever lay beyond the corn, whatever awaited me, I could not turn back. I could not escape. I could not unsee, because the pursuit had already begun. And the cornfields would not let me go. The sun was rising when I finally stumbled back to the crossroads. The fog had lifted, or maybe it had burned itself out in the night. But the air was still heavy with damp and silence. Mud clung to my boots, my coat hung in tatters, and my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my flashlight. I sank onto the edge of the road, the gravel digging into my palms, and tried to catch my breath. Everything was quiet, too quiet. I stared at the crossroads, the familiar stretch of asphalt meeting the fields and woods, and nothing looked wrong. No black figure waiting. No flickering lights slicing through the fog. No unnatural shadows twisting between the corn stalks. Just the road, sun hitting the edges of the fields, and a silence that felt empty, hollow. I rubbed my face, tasting the mud and fear that had clung to me all night. I tried to tell myself it was over, that it had been a nightmare, that my mind had played tricks on me after hours in the dark, alone, chasing shadows. But the weight in my chest wouldn't lift. The memory of that figure, the impossible lights, the endless cornfields, they were lodged in my mind like splinters I couldn't remove. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run back to town, back to my car, back to somewhere normal. But my legs refused. They shook beneath me, trembling not from exhaustion alone, but from something deeper, something primal. Fear had a memory now, and it had left its mark. I looked around again. The crossroads were empty. The road stretched out straight, mundane, and yet I felt it. The echo of the night lingering, pressing against the edges of reality. I could still feel the pressure of the figure in black. Even though I knew it wasn't there, even though there was nothing to see, I tried to think logically. Night had ended. Fog had lifted. I had seen no evidence of anything supernatural. And yet, my stomach turned as I realized I could still see the outlines of shapes in the distance. Just at the edge of vision. Shadows that weren't shadows. Figures that weren't there. My eyes darted, catching glimpses, and my heart sank each time. I shivered and forced myself to stand. The crossroads were just asphalt and gravel. The fields were just corn and dirt. The trees were just trees. I told myself again, nothing had happened. It was all a trick of the dark. A mind unraveling under stress and fatigue. And yet I couldn't shake it. Every detail of the night clung to me. The black figure, impossibly still, watching from fog. The lights, swirling in impossible geometries across the fields. The endless cornfields, mud sucking at my boots, disorienting, warping reality. Every step forward, every moment of fear, was carved into my memory like a scar. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe a local prank. Maybe hallucination from exhaustion. Maybe something I couldn't name, something I wasn't ready to name. The sun rose higher, burning off the last hints of fog. The light revealed nothing extraordinary. No footprints in the mud beyond my own. No traces of the figure. No marks of the lights. Nothing. And yet I knew it had happened. I stumbled along the edge of the crossroads, looking for some clue, some evidence, some anchor to reality. My flashlight hung limply in my hand, mud dripping from the edges. I could still feel the phantom weight of the figure behind me. I could still hear the whispering of the cornfields, the pulse of the lights, the unseen presence pressing in from the darkness. But when I turned, nothing was there. I tried to laugh, a short, bitter sound. "It's over," I muttered. "It's just over." My voice sounded foreign in the morning air, thin, fractured. I swallowed hard, tasting the fear, tasting mud, tasting something metallic I couldn't place. My stomach churned. My hands shook. I thought about the people who had called in the night before. The voices, frantic, panicked, terrified. I thought about what they might have seen, what they might have experienced. And I wondered, had they experienced the same thing I did? Or had it only been me, alone in the fog, a mind unraveling under pressure, chasing shadows in the dark? The thought made my stomach twist. I remembered the first call, the urgency, the terror in the voices. The second call, fragmented, screaming about figures. And I realized something terrifying. Even if none of it had been real, even if it had been hallucinations, the effect was the terror, the fear, the trauma. They were real, and they were mine. I sank back to the gravel, letting the sun warm my mud-streaked face. I tried to think of the world as it was supposed to be. Road, fields, trees, sunlight, birds, morning sounds. But I couldn't. My mind kept twisting the edges, filling in gaps with shapes that shouldn't exist. The figure, the lights, the endless cornfields. They clung to my vision, lingered behind my eyes, haunted the spaces between thoughts. I forced myself to take a deep breath. The air smelled of wet earth, of sunlight, of morning. Normal things. But the normal felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. My skin crawled, my chest tightened. I was alive, but I felt fractured, broken. Something had followed me back from the night. Something that hadn't needed to be seen to be felt. I thought about leaving the crossroads, driving back to town, locking myself in the station office, drinking coffee until my hands stopped shaking, pretending none of it had happened. But I knew the truth. I couldn't run from this. Not really. Not while the memory lingered like a shadow behind my eyes, coiling, twisting, waiting. I tried to talk to myself. Rationally. It's over, I said again. It's done. Nothing is there. But the words fell hollow. My mouth spoke, but my mind didn't believe them. I remembered every flicker of light, every rustle of corn, every impossible step through the mud. The memory pressed on me, insistent, unrelenting, reminding me that whatever had occurred, whatever had haunted that night, it had touched me, left a mark, left a fear I could not name. I thought about my childhood, about nights spent wandering in the woods, about the first time I realized the world had corners no light could reach. Fear had always been there, lurking in shadows, in abandoned barns, in the whisper of wind through the trees. But this was different. It was something else entirely. Something patient. Something old. Something that didn't need to move to terrify. I felt the phantom pressure in my chest again, as if the crossroads themselves remembered the night. My legs shook. My hands trembled. My mind reached for logic, for reason, for understanding. But all I found was the echo of the black figure. The impossible lights. The endless cornfields stretching into darkness. I wanted to leave. I wanted to erase the memory. I wanted to convince myself it had never happened. But I couldn't. The night had left a mark, deep and permanent. It had taught me something I couldn't unlearn. It had shown me that the world has edges, corners, places where reason does not reach, and it had made me see one. I stood, unsteady, mud dripping from my boots, coat heavy and soaked. I looked around once more. The crossroads were empty. The road stretched into the morning light. The fields glimmered with dew, ordinary and mundane. And yet I knew it was a lie. The memory lingered, heavy and impossible. The figure, the lights, the fog, the endless mud and corn. It was all there behind my eyes, in my chest, in my bones. I realized then that some things are not meant to be understood. Some nights are not meant to end cleanly. Some fear does not leave when the sun rises. I tried to take another breath, to anchor myself in the ordinary, to believe that daylight would erase what had happened. But the memory of the night pressed on me, insistent. My hands shook. My chest ached. My mind was a carousel of shadows and lights, of impossible geometry and relentless pursuit. I closed my eyes. The sun on my face, the gravel beneath my hands, the mundane sounds of morning, all of it was real. And yet, behind my eyelids, I could still see it. The black figure, the flickering lights, the endless cornfields, the mud pulling at my boots, the pressure in the air, the whispering of shapes just beyond perception. And I knew, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, that some part of the night had stayed with me, not visible, not tangible, but present, waiting, watching, patient. I whispered to myself, a promise I knew I couldn't keep. It's over. It has to be over. But deep in my chest, in my mind, in my bones, I knew the truth. It wasn't over. Not really. Not ever. The crossroads were empty, but the terror, the fear, the memory, they lingered, and I would carry them forever.